What's up, night owls? Welcome back to Demon Sleep. Real quick, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. I personally read every single one of them, and honestly, it makes my day seeing you all from around the world. If these dark tailies help you drift off or just escape reality for a bit, smash that like button and subscribe. But only if you think we've earned it. No pressure. Alright, lights off, rain on, blankets up. Let's dive into tonight's nightmare fuel. Story 1: Forest Whispers. Marcus Del Rey was 34 years old, and he was sitting with his back pressed against a boulder on the north slope of the Shining Rock Wilderness in western North Carolina, and he was not moving. He had not moved for 11 minutes. He knew it was 11 minutes because he had been watching the seconds tick on his watch, his wrist bent close to his face so the dim green glow wouldn't show. He had been counting, because counting was something to do other than think about the breathing. The breathing was behind him. It was close, maybe 12 feet, maybe less. It was slow and rhythmic with a low, wet quality to it, like something with a very large chest pulling air through something that was not quite a nose. It had started the breathing about 3 minutes after Marcus sat down to rest. He had heard it the way you hear things in the deep woods sometimes, that low ambient sound that could be wind, could be water, could be your own heartbeat amplified by exhaustion. But then it had moved. It had moved toward him, slow, deliberate, the pine needles crackling under something heavy, and then silence, and then the breathing, that close, that steady. And Marcus Del Rey, who held a master's degree in computer science from Georgia Tech, who had read every trail guide for this section of the Pisgah National Forest, who did not believe in things that went unexplained, was sitting completely still because he had understood, in that primitive, wordless part of himself that civilized life usually keeps sedated, that if he turned around, whatever was behind him would move. That was the rule. He didn't know where he'd learned it, but he knew it absolutely. As long as he did not look, it would not come any closer. To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back to the beginning. Marcus had been planning this trip for 8 months. His marriage had ended in February, not violently, not with screaming, but with the particular quiet brutality of two people who had simply stopped reaching for each other across the bed. His ex-wife, Diane, had gotten the apartment and the dog, which were the two things Marcus loved most about his life in Atlanta. He had gotten a suitcase and a storage unit on Peachtree Industrial, and a 6-month lease on a studio in Midtown that smelled like the previous tenants, cigarettes, no matter how many windows he opened. The hiking had started as therapy. His therapist, Dr. Annette Boone, practical woman, good shoes, no patience for what she called narrative self-pity, had suggested physical activity. Something that requires your whole attention, she'd said. Something that makes your body forget to let your brain catastrophize. He'd started on the easy trails, Stone Mountain, Kennesaw, Amicalola Falls, and then progressively longer, progressively harder, progressively deeper into terrain where his phone stopped pretending to have signal. He found to his surprise that Dr. Boone was right. On a trail, there was only the next step, only the grade of the slope, the weight of the pack, the smell of rain coming before the clouds arrived. There was no room in his skull for Diane's absence, or the cigarette smell, or the particular way. The studio's single window framed a parking garage at 5 in the morning when he woke up and couldn't go back to sleep. He told his friend Kevin about it over beers in June. "I'm going to do Shining Rock in October," he said. "Solo, 3 nights." Kevin had set down his glass. "That's serious backcountry." "I know. You're going alone." "That's what solo means." Kevin had looked at him for a moment in that way. Kevin had, careful, measuring like he was running calculations, and then picked his glass back up. "Okay," he said. "Text me when you're in and when you're out." "There's no signal in there." "Text me when you're back at the car then." Marcus had promised he would. He registered his permit in late September. He packed his gear with the methodical pleasure of someone who has learned to find comfort in preparation. The Osprey pack, the 3-season tent, the water filter, The layering system he'd spent an entire evening reading reviews for. He had a printed topo map in a waterproof case and a compass and a headlamp with fresh batteries and a backup headlamp with fresh batteries and a whistle, because the literature was very clear on the whistle. He drove up on a Thursday, parked at the trailhead at 9:14 a.m., signed the register, shouldered his pack, and walked into the trees. The first 2 days were everything he had needed them to be. The Shining Rock Wilderness is not a gentle place. It is steep and cold, and the trail markers are sparse enough that attention is required at all times. But it is astonishing in the way that wild places above 4,000 feet tend to be astonishing. The light is different up there. It comes through the canopy at angles that make everything feel more vivid and more transient simultaneously, like the world is showing you something it doesn't usually show people. He hiked 8 miles Thursday, set camp near a stream, cooked his freeze-dried meal and ate it slowly, and went asleep at 8:30 p.m. and slept like a stone. Friday was harder on the legs but easier on the mind. He found the white rock formations that give the area its name, great pale shelves of quartzite pushing up through the ridge line like the bones of something ancient, and he sat on them for an hour eating trail mix and watching a hawk work a thermal below him. He felt genuinely good. Not performing good, not telling himself a story about recovery, actually, quietly, physically good. He didn't notice, that first afternoon, that the birds were quieter than they should have been. It was Saturday morning when Marcus first noticed something was different. He woke at first light with the particular sharpness that comes from sleeping outside, that immediate full consciousness that beds seem to prevent, and lay in his sleeping bag listening to the woods come alive. Except they didn't. Not fully. He knew forest mornings by now. The tentative calls that started maybe an hour before sunrise and built gradually into something almost orchestral by the time the light was full. Thrushes, warblers, the specific percussion of woodpeckers, the background conversation of smaller birds that he couldn't identify by sound, but had come to rely on as a kind of ambient confirmation that everything was normal. Birds didn't stay quiet when things were normal. Birds stayed quiet when something had made them quiet. He told himself, elevation. He told himself, October, migration patterns, the birds that stay are fewer and less vocal. He was not an ornithologist. He could be wrong about what a high-elevation forest in late October was supposed to sound like. He made his coffee, the small ritual of the backpacking stove, the particular clean smell of it in the cold air, and sat outside his tent and watched the light come up through the trees and tried not to notice that the silence felt occupied. That was the word that came to him, and he dismissed it almost immediately because it was not a useful word. Silence was silence. It didn't have qualities. He broke camp and started hiking by 8. The trail that day took him along a ridge line with views east and west, and he made good time for the first 2 hours. The sky was clear, and the temperature was in the low 40s, and the pack had shaped itself to his body over 3 days in a way that made it almost comfortable. At around 10:30, he stopped at a switchback to drink water and consult his map, and that was when he heard it for the first time. It was behind him, maybe 100 yards, a footfall, not the light-specific sound of a deer or the skittering of smaller animals, but something heavier, something bipedal. He turned around. The trail was empty as far as he could see. The trees closed off his sightline about 70 yards back, where the switchback curved out of view. He waited, watched. Nothing. He thought, hiker behind me on the trail, moving at a similar pace. Stopped when I stopped, maybe taking in the view from the curve. This was not mysterious. The trails here saw dozens of hikers on weekends. He put his water bottle away, resettled his pack straps, and started walking. 40 minutes later, he heard it again. Same distance, same sound, something heavy, something on 2 feet. He turned around again. Empty trail. Wind moving through the top of the canopy, that long sighing sound it makes when it's moving a lot of air through old trees. He stood still for 3 full minutes. Nothing followed him into view. He told himself, the trail curves. Sound carries differently up here than it would on flat ground. He was interpreting an echo, probably. His own footfall bouncing off the rock faces and coming back to him delayed and changed by distance. This explanation felt sufficient. He continued. He did not turn around again for another hour, because he found that if he did not turn around, the explanation felt more sufficient. But he could feel it. That is the thing Marcus would say later to the 2 people he eventually told about this. He could feel the weight of something behind him on the trail in the way you can feel someone looking at you across a room before you see them. Not hearing it constantly. It was quiet more than it was audible, but aware of it in the back of his neck, in the specific tension that gathered between his shoulder blades as the afternoon wore on. When he made camp that Saturday evening, he set his tent at the edge of a small clearing rather than in it, back against the tree line facing out. He wasn't sure why. It just felt right. He ate and cleaned up and went into his tent as the light died. He lay in the dark for a long time before he slept. He woke at 2:17 a.m. He knew the exact time because he checked his watch with the same reflex he might have used to check his phone in the old life, the pre-hiking life, when waking in the night meant scrolling and blue light and 45 minutes of reading things that didn't matter. He lay still and he listened. The forest was quiet in the way forests are quiet at that hour, that profound layered silence that is actually dozens of small sounds when your ears adjust to it. Wind, something moving in the leaves 50 yards away, the creak of branches. And then, beneath all of that, the breathing. He would spend a lot of time later trying to describe it to himself, putting words against it to see if they fit. It was rhythmic. It was close, within 20 feet of the tent wall, he thought, maybe closer. It had that wet quality he would try to capture later, like something with a lot of moisture in its airways, not unhealthy sounding, not labored, just wet. And slow. That was the thing about it. It was so slow, not the panting of an animal that had been running, not the ragged breath of something in distress. It was the slow, deliberate, entirely calm breathing of something that was simply there, that had been there perhaps for some time, that was watching. And here is the part nobody talks about. Left out of every account he had read, every forum post, every late-night thread, every hiker's cautionary story that got shared and reshared until the details smoothed out like river stones, and only the dramatic parts remained. Nobody talks about the patience of it. Whatever was outside that tent did not pace, did not circle, did not make sounds designed to frighten. It simply waited with a patience that had nothing impatient in it at all, with the quality of something that has been waiting for a very long time and has not found it inconvenient. Marcus Delray lay inside his tent for 4 hours and 17 minutes without sleeping and without making a sound, and the breathing outside did not stop. And at 6:34 a.m., when the dark started releasing its grip on the tree line, it very slowly, very quietly moved away. He heard it go, the soft, specific weight of it displacing the pine needles, moving back into the trees, unhurried. A sound like something leaving because it had decided to leave, not because it had been frightened. He did not leave his tent for another 30 minutes. When he finally emerged, there was frost on the ground, and in the frost on the soft earth at the edge of the clearing, 3 partial impressions, not animal tracks he could identify, not boot prints, something between. He photographed them with his phone, stared at them for a long time. Then he packed his camp in 12 minutes, which was the fastest he had ever broken camp, and he started moving toward the trailhead. He hiked out in 5 hours, a distance that should have taken 8. He did not look behind him once, but twice he heard it, that measured, unhurried footfall, behind him on the trail, keeping pace. And twice he did not turn around. The Shining Rock Wilderness comprises over 18,000 acres of the Pisgah National Forest in Haywood County, North Carolina. It is one of the few designated wilderness areas in the eastern United States, which means no mechanized equipment, no maintained trails, no managed campsite infrastructure. What trails exist are marked only at intervals, by blazes on trees that time and weather work steadily to erase. Between 2009 and 2023, the Haywood County Sheriff's Office logged 14 missing persons reports originating from the Shining Rock Wilderness. Of those, 9 were resolved hikers who were overdue and then found, confused or injured and recovered. 4 remain open. One case, a man named Dale Whitson, 52, a retired schoolteacher from Asheville who entered the wilderness in May of 2018 and was never found. Included in its case file, a witness statement from another hiker named Jennifer Pierce, who reported seeing Whitson on a ridge trail at approximately 4:30 p.m. on the day of his disappearance. Pierce stated that Whitson appeared to be walking normally and showed no signs of distress. She stated that approximately 30 yards behind him on the trail, she observed what she initially took to be another hiker. Her statement continues. Jennifer Pierce, 39, freelance photographer, May 2018. I waved at the person behind him because that's just what you do on a trail, right? You acknowledge people. And it didn't wave back, which isn't unusual. Some people are antisocial. But the thing that I keep thinking about, it was moving wrong. Not in an obvious way, not like it was hurt, just the gait was off, like it was learning how to walk while it was walking, and it was looking at him the whole time, just at Dale. Jennifer Pierce was interviewed twice more by the sheriff's office. Dale Whitson was never found. There is separately a documented pattern in National Forest incident reports from multiple wilderness areas in the southern Appalachians, the Nantahala, the Cherokee, the Pisgah, of hikers reporting similar experiences across a span of years that predates any organized online community that might have circulated a template for such accounts. The reports share specific details: bipedal sounds, breathing, animals that have gone quiet, the sense of being paced rather than pursued. The Forest Service has no official position on these reports. Marcus Delray made it back to his car at 3:47 p.m. on Sunday. He sat in the driver's seat for 22 minutes before he started the engine. He had his phone out. He was looking at the photographs of the tracks. In the photographs, the impressions in the frost were clearer than he'd expected. The phone camera had caught them in the low morning light with a definition that made them look almost deliberate, posed, as though whatever made them had known they would be photographed. They were long, not wide, the width maybe of a large human foot, but long. The toe impressions, such as they were, did not spread the way human toes spread. They were close together and pointed forward in a way that suggested something aligned differently than a human body is aligned. And they were deep, deeply impressed for a surface impression, suggesting significant weight distributed oddly, more toward the back of the foot than the front. He showed the photographs to Kevin that evening. Kevin looked at them for a long time and said nothing. "What is that?" Marcus finally said. "I don't know," Kevin said. "That's not helpful." "No," Kevin agreed, "it isn't." Marcus sent the photographs to an email address he found on a wildlife biology department website at UNC Asheville. He never received a response. He did not go back to the Shining Rock Wilderness. But that is not the end of it, because endings suggest that something has concluded, and this has not concluded. 3 weeks after he returned from Shining Rock, Marcus was living in his Midtown studio on a Tuesday night in November, and his window was open because the cigarette smell had been bad that day and he'd been airing it out. He was at his desk, working. It was about 11 p.m. He heard breathing outside. His studio was on the 4th floor. He went to the window and he looked out at the parking garage across the street, and he stood there looking for a long time, and he saw nothing and heard nothing more. But he closed the window. and he did not open it again that fall. He told me, the person who eventually collected his account, that the thing he cannot stop thinking about is not what was behind him on the trail. Not the breathing in the dark, not the tracks in the frost, not the long Sunday night inside the tent. The thing he cannot stop thinking about is the patience. Something that patient, he said, isn't hunting. It's not hungry. It's not territorial. He looked at his hands for a moment. Something that patient is just keeping track, keeping an eye, like it wants to know where you are, what you're doing. He paused, like it's interested. Marcus Del Rey returned to hiking the following spring. He did not go back to the southern Appalachians. He drives now to the Smokies on the Tennessee side, where the trails are busier and the ranger stations are staffed 7 days a week, and the trailheads have cell signal. He hikes with a group now, 6, 7 people at a time. He joined a club. He says he sleeps fine. He says this with a quality in his voice that suggests he has decided to believe it. The photographs of the tracks exist. They exist on his phone and on a cloud backup and on a USB drive he keeps in his desk drawer, which he has looked at, on average, once a week for over a year. He looks at them, and then he puts the phone down and he goes back to what he was doing. He has not sent them to anyone else. Not since Kevin. Not since the biology department email that was never answered. Some things, he told me, you stop trying to explain, not because you've accepted them, because the explaining doesn't change anything. It was there. It's probably still there. He stopped. It probably knows I was there. The Haywood County Sheriff's Office closed Dale Whitson's missing persons file in January 2022. Not resolved. Closed. There is a difference. Resolved means they found something. Closed means they stopped looking. Jennifer Pierce does not hike anymore. She said when she was asked about it recently that she still thinks about the thing behind Dale Whitson on the trail, about the way it moved, about the way it watched him. You know what the worst part is, she said. It knew I saw it, and it didn't care. The tracks in the frost measured 17.5 inches from heel to the forward edge. Human feet do not do that. Story 2, the entity under the ice. The last entry in Dr. Petra Larson's station log was written on the morning of February 9th. It read, "Ice sample quarantined. Do not open the lower storage room. I am writing this so that someone will know. I did not imagine it. Whatever is in there, it has been in there for a very long time, and it is not finished." Below that, in handwriting that differed from the careful, precise script of the previous 37 entries, looser, listing slightly to the left, was one additional line. "It knows my name." The log was recovered 11 days later when the resupply flight arrived at Kalviken Station on the Svalbard archipelago, 78 degrees north latitude, in the Norwegian high Arctic. The station was intact. The equipment was functioning. The food stores were undisturbed. Dr. Petra Larson was not there. She was not found on the ice. She was not found in the station. She was not found anywhere. To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back to the beginning. Petra Larson was 41 years old, and she had wanted to work in the Arctic since she was 12. When she first read about the Nansen expedition in a library book in Bergen and understood, with the clarity that occasionally visits children and then deserts them, that ice was not empty, that it held things, that it was a record. She had devoted her career to demonstrating this in precise, defensible, peer-reviewed terms. Her doctoral work at the University of Tromsø had focused on microbial preservation in permafrost, the question of what lived inside frozen ground, what survived, what had been surviving for 10,000 years or 50,000 years or more, waiting in a kind of biological suspension for conditions to change. Her work was respected, cited. She was not famous in the way that some scientists are famous, but within her specific field, she was known as someone whose data was clean and whose interpretations were careful. She had done 2 previous stints at Kalvaken. The first was a 6-week summer residency in 2018, during the perpetual daylight season, when the station was fully staffed and the work was logistically straightforward. The second was a 3-month winter deployment in 2021, shared with 2 colleagues, a geologist named Sven and a technician named Amara, who handled the mechanical systems and baked bread every Sunday and kept the mood of the station from collapsing under the weight of the dark. The third deployment, the one beginning in January of 2024, was solo. This was unusual but not unheard of. Budget constraints and scheduling conflicts had left a 6-week window in the research calendar that needed filling, and Petra had volunteered. Her colleagues had expressed reservations. The winter on Svalbard at 78 degrees north is not a comfortable thing. 4 months of continuous darkness, temperatures that test the outer limits of what rated equipment is designed for, isolation that does not merely restrict but presses, insistently, on the mind. A solo stay of 6 weeks was at the edge of what the university's ethics board was comfortable approving. But Petra had done the previous winter rotation and emerged from it, by all observable measures, fine. She had references and documentation, and a psychological evaluation that used words like resilient and adaptable, and demonstrates healthy relationship with solitude. She had a protocol for daily check-ins. She had emergency equipment. She had the station's satellite phone and an emergency locator beacon, and a multi-layer contingency plan for every foreseeable scenario. She had not foreseen this one. The log entries that have been made available cover the period from January 12th through February 9th, a span of 29 days. The first 14 are professional, thorough, and unremarkable. They document ice core extraction work at depths down to 340 meters below the surface of a frozen lake approximately 2 kilometers from the station. Weather conditions, equipment status, caloric intake, sleep quality, psychological self-assessment on a scale of 1 to 10. Her self-assessed scores hover between 7 and 8 for the first 2 weeks. The entries are in Norwegian. They are translated here. January 14th, beautiful light today. The aurora was particularly strong after midnight. Remembered why I wanted this. January 19th, core sample 7 showing unusual stratification, not matching surrounding matrix, will extract carefully. Excited. January 22nd, brought core 7 indoors for analysis. The ice is very old. Carbon work will take time, but my preliminary assessment is late Pleistocene, possibly older. The material inside the inclusion is, I don't have a word for it yet. Something biological, very small, possibly nothing, probably nothing. January 25th, could not sleep, not unusual for this phase of the deployment. The station makes sounds in cold this severe. I know this. The sounds are structural. January 26th, the sounds are not structural. This is where the log changes. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the careful professional documentation of the first weeks begins to develop a different quality. The sentences become shorter. The observations shift from the external weather, equipment, data to the internal. What she is hearing, what she is not sure she is hearing. January 28th, Core 7 is in the lower storage room. I have been maintaining it at stable temperature. I go in twice daily to check readings. The third time I went in today, I had not intended to go in. I was in the corridor, and then I was at the storage room door. I don't remember walking there. January 30th, psychological self-assessment 5, attributing to sleep disruption, will log sleep hours more carefully. February 1st, I heard my name. No qualifier. No, I thought I heard. I heard my name, clearly. In the lower storage room from behind the door, my name. Spoken the way my mother spoke it, which was with the second syllable slightly lengthened. No one alive does that anymore. Psychological self-assessment 4. I did not open the door. The entries from February 2nd through February 8th are shorter. They are also less regular. The twice-daily check-in calls to the university, required by protocol, were made on schedule throughout this period, and the recordings of those calls, which have been reviewed by the university's welfare team, do not indicate significant distress. Petra sounded tired. She sounded, perhaps, slightly more clipped than usual. She answered the questions the protocol required her to answer. Her physical condition, her equipment status, her psychological self-assessment. She reported her self-assessment as 5, consistently, across all the calls in this period. To the person conducting the check-ins, a graduate student named Mikkel who worked 3 days a week at the communications desk, she seemed fine. She told herself it was nothing. She was still telling herself that. February 3rd. I have not opened the lower storage room today. Equipment readings are accessible remotely. There is no operational reason I must go in person. This is fine. This is a reasonable decision. February 5th. The sound is not only in the storage room now. I want to be precise about this. I am a scientist. I am trying to be precise. The sound, the voice, is intermittent. It is not continuous. It comes at the edges of sleep and at the edges of rooms. It comes when the station is very quiet and when I have been alone for a long time, which is always. I know what auditory effects isolation can produce. I have read the literature. I am not dismissing this as a symptom. I am noting it as a data point. The data point is that it called my name again last night, and this time it said something else after my name, and I did not understand the words, but I understood the direction of them. The meaning without the words. It was asking me something. I don't know what I answered. February 7th. I moved the sample out of the lower storage room. I moved it to the main lab. I don't know why I did this. I had decided not to. I went to check the remote equipment readings, and then I was standing in the lower storage room holding the core container, and I was already in the corridor before I knew I'd made a decision. Self-assessment 3. The sample is in the main lab. I keep looking at it. Something is looking back. February 8th, the last entry before the final one, is a single sentence. I have been here for a very long time. Kalviken Research Station was established in 2003 by a consortium of Norwegian and German universities as a permanent Arctic monitoring facility. It has been continuously staffed or regularly visited since its founding, with gaps in residency during the most severe winter months. Core Sample 7, the sample designated in Petra Larsson's log, was recovered intact from the main lab by the resupply team that arrived February 20th. It was transported under temperature-controlled conditions to the University of Tromsø for analysis. The carbon dating of the ice matrix in which the biological material was embedded returned a date of approximately 85,000 years before present. The biological material inside the inclusion has been described, in the one published paper that has emerged from the analysis, as exhibiting structural characteristics inconsistent with any identified species in the current fossil record, while displaying features suggestive of organized cellular complexity. The paper is authored by 3 researchers, none of whom was the original discoverer of the sample, because the original discoverer is not available. Dr. Havard Ness, 58, geomicrobiologist, University of Tromsø, 2024. The honest answer is we don't know what it is. The honest answer is that we know it's old, we know it's biological, and we know that some of the tissue, if tissue is even the right word, showed markers that we associate with metabolic activity, active metabolism. In an 85,000-year-old sample, that should not be possible. That is not something I am able to explain. Dr. Ness has requested that the sample be placed in long-term frozen storage. His request has not yet been acted on. No human remains were found at or near Kalviken Station. The lower storage room showed no evidence of disturbance. The ice on the lake near the extraction site was intact. A formal missing persons investigation was opened by the Norwegian police. It remains open. The resupply team that found the empty station consisted of 4 people: the pilot, a logistics coordinator named Anders, and 2 graduate students who were scheduled to begin their own residency when Petra's concluded. They have all been interviewed. They all say the same things in the same order, the way people do when they experience something together that they have not been able to stop thinking about. The station was warm. The heating system was functioning. The food stores were fully stocked. There was a mug on the kitchen table with coffee in it, cold, that had been poured perhaps 12 hours before the team arrived. There was no note, no sign of distress, no indication of any kind that whoever had poured the coffee had intended to leave. The lower storage room, the one referenced repeatedly in the log, was open when they arrived. The door was ajar. Anders pushed it open all the way. The room was empty. The sample was in the main lab. The equipment was in standby mode. But the floor of the lower storage room, the concrete floor, which is coated in a standard industrial sealant that has been on that floor since the station's founding in 2003, had cracked. Not in the way concrete cracks under thermal stress, which is common in Arctic conditions. Not in the way it cracks under impact. The cracks radiated out from a point in the center of the floor in a pattern that one of the graduate students, Lena Hagen, described as looking like a hand print. Something very large pressing up from below. There is one additional detail that has not appeared in any published account, that was shared privately with the person who compiled this record, by one of the 4 resupply team members who has asked not to be identified. When this person entered the lower storage room and looked at the cracked floor, they heard something. Below the floor, below the concrete, below the permafrost. Breathing. Slow. Wet. Patient. And then very faintly, a voice. Saying a name. Not Petra's name. Their name. They left the room and did not go back in. The sample Core 7, the inclusion, the 85,000-year-old material with its impossible metabolic markers, is currently in storage at a facility outside of Tromsø. It has not been destroyed. This is the decision that Dr. Ness's unanswered request speaks to. It has not been destroyed because it is scientifically significant, because it is potentially one of the most important biological discoveries in decades, because the people responsible for making that decision are scientists, and scientists do not destroy significant samples. This is an entirely reasonable position. It is also worth noting that the storage facility is staffed by 3 rotating researchers, one of whom, at any given time, is alone in the building overnight. None of the 3 researchers involved in the analysis of Core 7 have reported unusual experiences. None have requested a transfer. None have raised any formal concerns about the sample. One of them, when asked informally about the work, said, "It's fascinating. I find myself thinking about it a lot, even when I'm home, even when I'm trying to sleep." He smiled when he said this. It was not clear why he was smiling. The logs have been archived and are technically accessible under Norwegian Freedom of Information regulations, which is how they came to be part of this record. The final entry, the one that ends "It knows my name," is written in a handwriting that the university's forensic document examiner examined at the request of the police investigation. The examiner's report noted that the handwriting was consistent with samples of Petra Larsson's hand, same person, almost certainly, but exhibited a change in letter formation that the examiner described as suggesting significant alteration of motor control, possible dissociative state, and I want to note that this is highly unusual for this type of analysis, the involvement of a second hand guiding or directing the first. A second hand, guiding or directing the first. The cracked floor of the lower storage room at Kalviken Station was repaired in March. The new concrete was poured over the old. The researchers who returned in April said it looked fine. They said the room felt fine. That was the second account. 10 more remain. The next one is documented, filed, on record. The date was November 7th. Story 3, The Russian Sleep Experiment. Late autumn 1947. Classified research facility, Soviet Union. Location undisclosed. 5 men entered a sealed chamber on a Thursday. The chamber measured 9 meters by 6 meters. It contained 5 cots, 5 chairs, 5 desks, books, paper, pencils, a toilet, a sink, enough canned food to sustain 5 adult males for 30 days, a drain in the center of the floor. The drain was not for water. The men were told they would remain in the chamber for 30 days. They were told this was a study in prolonged wakefulness. They were told that upon successful completion of the experiment, they would be released and their files. Each of the 5 was a political prisoner, selected specifically for this purpose, specifically because they had no advocates, specifically because their disappearance into a research program would occasion no official inquiry, would be clear. They were not told about the gas. The gas was introduced through the ventilation system beginning at hour 1. It was a stimulant compound. The precise formulation does not appear in any published record, and the chemist responsible died in 1959 without having disclosed the full synthesis, designed to suppress the sleep drive entirely, to make sleep neurologically impossible, to keep the subjects awake indefinitely. The researchers monitoring the experiment from outside the chamber, through reinforced observation glass and via microphones embedded in the chamber walls, recorded everything. What they recorded is the subject of this account. To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back to the beginning. The research program that produced the sleep deprivation experiment was one of approximately 40 active classified research initiatives operating under Soviet military scientific authority in the period immediately following World War II. Its official designation does not appear in declassified Soviet archives, which is itself notable. Most programs of this era were eventually cataloged in some form during the post-Soviet archival openings of the 1990s, even if their contents were redacted. This program was not cataloged. It was not redacted. It was simply absent. The lead researcher, identified in the document chain that forms the primary source material for this account only as the director, held a doctorate in neurophysiology from Leningrad State University and had worked during the war on chemical compounds affecting neurological function in battlefield conditions. His name has not been established with certainty. Several researchers who have worked with the source documents believe he may have been a man named Grigory Vasilyev, born 1901, who disappears from all official Soviet records in 1948. But this has not been confirmed. The 5 subjects were men between the ages of 24 and 41. They are identified in the documents only by number, Subject 1 through Subject 5. They were described in the intake processing notes as follows. Subject 1, 41 years old, former teacher, arrested 1945, charge of anti-Soviet intellectual activity, noted as calm and cooperative. Subject 2, 33 years old, former factory worker, arrested 1944, charge of theft of state property, noted as physically robust. Subject 3, 29 years old, former medical student, arrested 1946, charge unspecified, noted as highly intelligent, likely to ask questions. Subject 4, 31 years old, former soldier, arrested 1943, charge of cowardice before the enemy, noted as sullen but compliant. Subject 5, 24 years old, former student, arrested 1947, charge of distributing subversive literature, the youngest, noted as anxious, eager to please. They were brought to the facility on a truck with blacked-out windows. They were given a meal. They were told what the experiment required of them. They signed a form because there was always a form. They entered the chamber. The door was sealed. Days 1 through 5 were unremarkable. The observation logs, which are the most complete surviving portion of the source material, running to 847 handwritten pages, document this period in detached clinical language. The subjects ate. They read. They talked among themselves, initially with the stilted formality of strangers thrown together by circumstance, then with more ease. Subject 3 spent most of his time reading. Subject 4 exercised compulsively, push-ups, calisthenics, wearing a path in the concrete between the cots. Subject 5 wrote letters on the provided paper, which was a condition of the experiment. The letters were never sent. They were collected daily through a slot and read by the research team and filed. The letters Subject 5 wrote in this first period were addressed to his mother. They were unremarkable. He missed her cooking. He was managing. He thought he would be out of here in a month. He was fine. He used the word fine a lot. Day 5. First behavioral changes noted. Irritability between subjects. Subject 2 and Subject 4 argued for 40 minutes over the placement of a cot. Subject 1 stopped talking. Not gradually. 1 hour he was speaking normally. The next he was sitting in his chair facing the wall and nothing addressed to him received a response. The researchers noted this. One of them wrote in the margin of the observation log, "Is he sleeping with eyes open?" Check. He was not sleeping. They confirmed this by waking him with a loud sound transmitted through the intercom. He responded. He was awake. He just wasn't there anymore, in any meaningful sense. He had retreated to somewhere inside himself, and whatever he found there, it did not require conversation. Day 7, Subject 3, the medical student began talking to himself. Not quietly. He lectured in a precise, rapid murmur. On topics the observers could not always make out. When they could, it was anatomy, the structure of the brain, the specific functions of specific regions. He spoke with the confidence of someone teaching a class, occasionally pausing as though waiting for a question from students who were not there. Day 8, Subject 5 stopped writing letters. Day 9, 300 HOURS. Subject 2 screamed for 7 hours. He stood in the center of the chamber next to the drain and screamed. Not words at first, then words, but not in any order that constituted language. The other subjects, including Subject 1, who had not moved or spoken in 4 days, moved to the corners of the room and pressed against the walls and watched him. He stopped at the end of the 7th hour, not because he calmed down, but because his vocal cords gave out. He stood in silence, mouth still open, chest still heaving with the effort of screams that produced no more sound. He sat down on the floor next to the drain. He did not get up again. Day 15. The researchers had stopped sleeping in shifts. They had stopped sleeping at all, not by design, not by exposure to any compound, but because what was happening inside the chamber had made sleep feel like an impossibility, a story someone had told them once about people in another country who lived very differently. The observation log for this period is fragmentary. Pages are missing. Several pages that remain have been partially destroyed, water damage, or something else, and are illegible in sections. What is legible is enough. What I am about to tell you is documented. On record, in files technically public but practically inaccessible. I found them, read every page. Because what happened once is still happening. Day 15. The gas concentration had been increased on day 10 in response to concerns that the stimulant effect might be diminishing. Subject 3 had appeared to lose consciousness for approximately 40 seconds on day 9, which was not permitted. The concentration was increased to levels that the compound's developer had not recommended for sustained exposure. The developer raised this concern in writing. His concern was noted and disregarded. Day 15. Subject 1 moved. For the first time in 6 days, Subject 1 stood up from his chair. He walked to the center of the room. He stood over the drain. He knelt down and put his hands flat on either side of it. He stayed like that for 4 hours. The observers watched him. No one recorded what they thought he was doing. Day 15, 1700 hours. Subject 4 approached Subject 2, who was still sitting on the floor next to the drain. Subject 2 had not eaten in 3 days. Subject 4 had been bringing him food. He placed a bowl of canned food next to Subject 2. Subject 2 looked at it. Then Subject 2 looked at Subject 4. Then Subject 2 grabbed Subject 4's arm and bit through it. The intercom crackled. A voice from inside the chamber, Subject 3, the medical student, still and always precise, spoke directly into the microphone embedded in the wall next to his desk. "We know you are watching," Subject 3 said. He said it in the calm tone of someone stating a fact that everyone in the room already knows. "We want you to keep watching." The researchers looked at each other through the glass. "What we are becoming," Subject 3 said, "needs witnesses." The primary source documents for this account exist in a private archive and have been authenticated by 2 independent document examiners who specialize in mid-century Soviet administrative materials. The authentication is based on paper composition, ink chemistry, and administrative formatting consistent with the period and provenance claimed. This does not make every detail in them verifiable. It makes the documents themselves real. The document chain includes 847 pages of observation logs, handwritten in Russian, covering days 1 through 28. 12 pages of internal memoranda between the director and a superior officer, identified only by rank. Photographs, 31 photographs. They are not reproduced here. A final report, 4 pages, authored by the director, dated March 1948. The final report concludes with a recommendation. The recommendation is that the research program be discontinued. The director's stated reason is not ethical. It is not humanitarian. His stated reason is, the compound does not produce the desired effect. It produces a different effect. The different effect is not yet understood. Further research is required before the different effect can be used operationally. Continued research in current form is not advised. Name withheld, translator and researcher, location withheld, 2019. The thing that gets me every time I go back to these pages is how careful the language is. The director never writes down what the different effect is. He knows the observers are reading everything. He knows someone above him will read the report. He writes around it. He describes the observable outputs, the behavioral changes, the physical changes in clinical terms, but he never puts a name to what he thinks it is. And when you read what the observable outputs are, when you read that, you understand why he didn't put a name to it. The translator who provided this account has not made the photographs available for review. March 1948, Facility DCOMMISSIONED. Subject's subsequent status unrecorded. Day 28. The gas was stopped on day 28, not as a protocol decision. The observation logs for days 21 through 27 are the missing pages. What happened in that week is not recorded, or the recordings were removed. What is known is that the decision was made on day 28 to stop the gas, open the chamber, and terminate the experiment. The researchers who opened the door, there were 6 of them with the director, and they went in together because no one wanted to go first, and so they all went at once, found 4 subjects alive. Alive is the word used in the final report. It is used precisely once, and then not used again, which suggests that whoever wrote it understood the word was doing more work than it could do. What they found was 4 of the 5 subjects, and all 4 were standing, not sitting, not lying on the cots, standing, distributed in the 4 corners of the room the way they had been distributed on day 9 when subject 2 had screamed. They had not eaten in an unknown number of days. They had not slept at any point in the 28 days. They did not react to the researchers entering the room. Except Subject 3. Subject 3, the medical student, the one who had said "we want you to keep watching," turned to face the director when the director entered the room. He looked at him. He looked at him the way the director wrote, "Something looks at something it has been waiting for." Subject 3 said one thing. He said, "Don't turn it off." He was not referring to the gas. The gas was already off. The director asked him because the director was thorough what he meant. Subject 3 looked at him for a long moment. "Whatever you turned on," Subject 3 said, "when you kept us awake, whatever opened, don't turn it off." The director's report does not specify what happened to the 4 surviving subjects. Subject 5 was not among the survivors. He was in the room. He was in the room, but he was not among the survivors. The report notes his status in a single phrase, Subject 5, not recoverable. It does not explain what this means. The drain in the center of the floor was not discussed in the report. The photographs document the drain. The translator who has seen the photographs will not describe what the photographs of the drain show. He will say only that Subject 1, who had knelt next to the drain on day 15, was not standing in any of the 4 corners of the room when the researchers entered. He will say only that. Nothing more about Subject 1. The facility was decommissioned in March of 1948. What decommissioned means in this context is unclear. It does not appear in any record of Soviet facility inventory for the period, which means it either never existed in those inventories or was removed from them. The compound, the gas, has never been synthesized or identified by any Western research program. Several attempts have been made, based on partial descriptions in the source documents. None have produced a compound that matches the described effects, or none have produced a compound that produces only the described effects, and the additional effects have discouraged further research. There is a distinction there that matters. The director's final report contained, as its last paragraph before the recommendation, an observation that has been the subject of considerable discussion among the small number of researchers who have seen the documents. The observation was this: what the subjects described in their coherent periods as having heard or seen or perceived during the experiment, these descriptions were remarkably consistent across all 5. They described the same sounds, the same images, the same entity which they each described independently without collaboration, in identical terms. This consistency cannot be accounted for by shared suggestion or mutual reinforcement. They described it the same way because it was the same. He did not describe it. He did not write down what they described. He ended the paragraph there. The letters Subject 5 wrote to his mother in the first 5 days of the experiment were filed with the observation logs. He signed them, "Your loving son, alive and well." The last letter, the one written on day 5, the last one he ever wrote, ended differently. It ended, "Something is in here with us, and it has been in here longer than we have, and I think it was waiting." Story 4, the last truck stop before dawn. The thing that Carla Reyes would think about afterward. And there was an afterward. She was one of the people who got to have an afterward, which she knew and was grateful for in the specific way you are grateful for something you came too close to losing, was the coffee cup. She had set it down on the table when she first sat down. When she went to the bathroom 15 minutes later, she had left it there. When she came back, it was on the other side of the table. She stood in the aisle between booths and looked at the cup for a long time. She had not moved it. She was the only one in the diner. And the waitress, who had been behind the counter 5 minutes ago, who had poured the coffee into the cup that was now on the wrong side of the table, was not there anymore. Carla stood in the aisle for what she later estimated was about 30 seconds. That sounds brief. It was not brief. At 3 in the morning in a diner on the edge of a county road in central Texas, 47 miles from the nearest town, with rain coming in sheets against the glass and her car the only car in the lot and the cook, who should have been in the kitchen. She had heard the sounds of the kitchen, apparently also gone. 30 seconds is a very long time. Long enough to understand that you have made a mistake. Long enough to realize the mistake was not stopping here. The mistake was not leaving the moment. Something felt wrong. To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back to the beginning. Carla Eyes was 37 years old and she drove for a living, which is not a romantic thing, despite what people who don't do it tend to think. She drove a 2019 Honda Pilot with 208,000 miles on it, and a cracked rear bumper where she'd been rear-ended in an Omaha parking lot the previous spring. And she drove it between Dallas and Phoenix and back again, a route she covered every 6 weeks on a schedule that her employer, a regional pharmaceutical supply company, did not adjust for weather or holidays, or the particular tiredness that accumulates in the body after enough years of these distances. She had been doing this for 9 years. She knew every truck stop, every diner, every rest area, every gas station on or near the route. She knew which bathrooms to avoid, which pies to order, which parking lots were safe for a 2-hour sleep in the car versus which ones would find someone trying your door handles at 2 a.m. She had a checklist she ran through before she stopped anywhere new. Working lights in the parking lot, other vehicles with plates she could read, an employee visible through the window before she went in, easy line of sight to her car from the dining area. She was not a careless person. She was a careful person who had been careful for a long time and had let the carefulness become routine, which is not the same thing as carelessness, but can look identical from the outside. The diner Vickers was not on her usual list. She had passed it dozens of times on this route and never stopped, not from any feeling about it, but simply because she had her stops and her schedule and she stuck to them. But on this particular run in October, she had started late out of Dallas, and the rain had cost her 90 minutes and her next fuel point was closed for renovation, which she hadn't known. And when she saw the neon of Vickers at 2:45 a.m. with the tank sitting at a quarter, she pulled in. The parking lot was lit. There were 2 vehicles besides her own, a pickup truck near the far end and a sedan close to the door. The lights inside were on, and she could see through the plate glass window a woman behind the counter. She went through her checklist, everything cleared. She went inside. The woman behind the counter was somewhere in her 50s, lean, with the specific economy of movement that comes from years of working a space you know by memory. She smiled at Carla the way diner employees smile at people who come in at 3 in the morning, warmly, and with something underneath the warmth that was not unfriendly, but was not entirely present either. The specific quality of someone who has been awake a long time. "What can I get you?" she said. "Coffee," Carla said, "and a piece of whatever pie is still good at this hour." The woman smiled again. "Pecan." "Perfect." She sat down in a booth by the window, facing the parking lot, facing her car, the way she always sat. The coffee came. The pie came. Both were very good, which she noted with the particular satisfaction of someone who knows that good pie at 3 in the morning is more than the pie. It is a small, reliable thing in a life that has a lot of unreliable ones. She ate slowly. She watched the rain on the glass. She was thinking about the exit in Phoenix, the specific ramp she always missed, planning her approach to it the way she planned approaches to things she had missed before. She was not thinking about anything that should worry her. That is the thing she would come back to. She felt nothing. No warning, no unease, no raised hair on the back of the neck. Nothing. Until she went to the bathroom and came back, and the cup was on the wrong side of the table. Carla is a practical woman. She will tell you this herself, firmly, the way practical people have to tell you because they worry you won't believe it given what they're about to describe. She stood in the aisle and she looked at the cup and she thought, I moved it without noticing. She thought, I set it down differently than I remembered. She thought, I am tired and my memory at 3 in the morning is not a reliable instrument. She sat back down. She sat down on the same side she'd been on, the window side, and she reached across and took the cup from the other side of the table and took a drink of the coffee. The coffee was cold. She had left it 5 minutes ago. It had been hot when she left it. She had burned her tongue on it, in fact, which was a specific physical memory that was not the kind of thing she doubted. The coffee was not 5 minutes cold. It was much colder than that. It was the temperature of coffee that had been sitting for an hour, maybe more. She looked at the cup. She looked toward the counter. The woman was not behind it. The counter was empty. The kitchen pass-through was dark. The sounds she had heard when she came in, the ambient sounds of a working kitchen, faint through the pass-through, the specific low clatter of that, were gone. The diner was quiet except for the rain. She thought, the woman went on break. The cook is on break. It's 3 a.m. They are two people running a diner in the middle of nowhere. Of course, there are moments when the front of the house is empty. She thought, the coffee is cold because I was in the bathroom longer than I thought. She thought, the cup is on the wrong side because I moved it without noticing. She thought all of these things in rapid sequence. The way practical people line up explanations like sandbags when the water is rising. And she sat in the booth and held the cold coffee, and she watched the rain, and she made herself breathe steadily. And then she looked at the pickup truck at the far end of the parking lot. It had not been there before. Or she reconsidered this, it had been there. She had seen two vehicles when she pulled in, a pickup at the far end. Yes, that was one of them. But she had seen it at the far end. It was closer now. It was approximately where the sedan had been parked, close to the door. And the sedan was gone. She had not heard anyone leave. The rain was loud, but not that loud. She had been in the bathroom, yes, but the bathroom was on the interior wall. You would hear a car engine starting. You would hear the lot. She had heard nothing. She set the coffee down. She was looking at the pickup, rain across the windshield. The cab was dark. She thought, I cannot see if there is someone in the truck. She thought, I am not able to tell from here if someone is sitting in that truck watching this window. And then slowly, in the way she would spend the following weeks trying to describe, a slowness that felt like the room tilting rather than anything sudden, all the lights in the diner went out. Complete dark. Not the partial dark of streetlights through windows, not the dim survival of exit signs, the generator-grade dark of a place where everything has stopped at once, the kind of dark that has weight to it. Carla's hand found her phone in her jacket pocket before she had consciously decided to reach for it. She turned on the flashlight and swept it across the diner and saw empty booths, empty counter, the dark pass-through of the kitchen, the condensation on the plate glass of the window, and through the window the pickup truck, still there, still in the near lot, still with its cab too dark to read. She stood up. She stood up because she was not going to sit in a dark booth in a diner with no people and a truck outside she couldn't see into. She was going to walk to the door, go to her car, and leave. And she was going to get gas somewhere in the next 40 miles, even if it meant waking someone up. And she was going to think about this, carefully, and with time and daylight. And she was going to arrive at a reasonable explanation. She was 3 steps from the booth when she heard the kitchen. Sounds she had heard when she came in. The low ambient noise of a working kitchen, clattering, movement, coming now from behind the dark pass-through. But the lights were out. And there was something else in the sounds, something under them. That was the way she would describe it, under them. The way you can hear a radio through a wall, not the words, not the specific sounds, but the fact that there is a sound, that something is producing sound on the other side of a barrier you cannot see through. What was under the kitchen noise was breathing. Slow, multiple, more than one. She stopped moving. And here is the part nobody talks about. Left out of every account, every police report, every conversation she's had about that night in the years since. She knew, not suspected, not feared, knew with the absolute cellular certainty of a body that has received a signal the conscious mind is still catching up to. She knew that whatever was in the kitchen was not the cook. She knew that the woman who had brought her coffee and pie was not on break. She knew that the truck outside had not been parked by a traveler stopping in for the night. And she knew, this is the part she tells last, always in the lowest voice, that whatever was in the kitchen had been there when she came in, had been there behind the sounds of cooking, behind the warmth of the lit diner, behind the smiling woman with the pecan pie, had been waiting with the patience of something that has arranged things exactly the way it wants them, behind a door that she had, until this moment, been walking toward. She was 3 steps from the kitchen pass-through. She turned around. She walked to the door. She pushed it open and went out into the rain, and she got to her car in 5 steps, and she was inside, and had the engine running before the door of the diner opened. She didn't look back to see what came out. She had decided not to look. She made the decision consciously in the parking lot with the rain soaking through her jacket, and she kept it. She drove. Vickers Diner has operated since 1987, at mile marker 247 on Farm Road 612 in Kerr County, Texas. It is licensed, has a current health inspection certificate, is staffed on the overnight shift by 2 employees, and is open 24 hours. Carla reported the incident to the Kerr County Sheriff's Office on the morning following, after driving through the night to Kerrville and sleeping 3 hours in a comfort inn parking lot because she did not trust herself on the road. The deputy who took her report was professional. He asked the right questions. He drove out to Vickers that afternoon. He found the diner open, lights working, 1 woman behind the counter, a cook in the kitchen. Neither employee matched Carla's description of the woman who had served her. Both had been, they said, on duty since 6 p.m. the previous evening. The security camera footage from the exterior of the diner, a system installed in 2021, according to the owner, showed Carla's Honda pulling into the lot at 2:47 a.m., showed her going inside, showed her coming out at 3:11 a.m. and driving away. No other vehicles were visible in the footage. The deputy noted this in his report. He noted that Carla's vehicle is clearly visible the entire time. He noted that the lot appears empty except for her vehicle. He noted that the camera coverage does not include the far end of the parking lot. Carla requested a copy of the report. She got it. She has read the last 3 lines many times. Complainant insists she observed a second vehicle, a pickup truck, which is not visible in available footage. Complainant appeared credible and showed no signs of intoxication. No further action recommended at this time. Carla Reyes, 37, regional pharmaceutical driver, October 2023. The part I keep coming back to, I know what I saw. I know the truck was there. I know those were not the same people who were in that diner when I walked in. I know it. But even if you believe all of that, even if you believe every word, what I can't figure out is, what would have happened if I had gone to the bathroom and come back and the cup was on the right side of the table, the side I left it on? If the coffee was hot, if everything was the way it was supposed to be. She looked at her hands. I don't think the cup moved by accident. I think somebody needed me to know something was wrong. Carla Reyes has not driven the Farm Road 612 route since October 2023. She has requested a different route from her employer. The request was granted. There is a detail Carla did not include in the sheriff's report. She did not include it because she could not figure out how to say it in a way that would not undermine everything else she had said. And she needed the deputy to believe the everything else, so she made a choice. When she pushed through the diner's front door and stepped out into the rain, she did not go directly to her car. She stopped. For about 2 seconds, she stopped. because she was adjusting her jacket and finding her keys, the purely physical business of going from inside to outside in the rain. And in those 2 seconds, she was standing on the front step of the diner facing the parking lot. And she glanced, just glanced, the reflexive check she runs on every parking lot at the far end of the lot. At the part the camera didn't cover. There were more trucks there. Not one. She couldn't count them in the rain and the dark, but more than 3, more than 4. Pickup trucks, she thought, though she couldn't be certain. Shapes, parked in a row, and this is the part she doesn't say, this is the part she made her decision about. Running. All the engines running. She could see the exhaust rising in the cold air, pale, drifting up. All of them running. All of them waiting. And in the nearest one, the one the camera did not catch because the camera did not cover the far end of the lot, a shape behind the wheel. Watching her. Just watching. She looked away. She had already decided not to look, and she looked away and she walked to her car, and she did not run because something told her not to run. The same thing that told her not to turn around when she heard the kitchen sounds, and she did not run. She got in her car. She drove out of the lot the short way, the way that kept the far end of the lot to her right and slightly behind her, and she kept her eyes on the road ahead, and she did not look in her rearview mirror for the first 3 miles. When she finally did look in the mirror, the road behind her was empty. Rain, dark, empty road. She put the mirror back to its normal angle and she drove. She drove the 47 miles to Careville without music, without the radio, with both hands on the wheel, watching the road, watching the rear view, listening, in the way she now listened to every ambient sound, for the breathing. She did not hear it. That was the night of October 14th, 2023. On October 16th, 2 days later, a trucker named Hector Maines reported stopping at Vickers Diner on Farm Road 612 at approximately 4 a.m. and finding the diner dark and locked, with no vehicles in the lot and no indication that it had been opened that evening. He had stopped there dozens of times before. He was familiar with the hours. He noted this on the app he uses to track useful stops on his route. His note says, Vickers on 612 closed. Was it always this far off the main road? Seemed further than I remembered. Probably skip next time. The diner's Google listing continues to show it as open 24 hours. The reviews are mostly positive. People mention the pecan pie. Carla Reyes sleeps with the lights on now. This is a thing she is aware of and slightly embarrassed by and entirely unable to stop doing. She has a lamp on a timer set to come on at midnight because she cannot make herself set it earlier. It would mean admitting something she is not ready to admit. But midnight is when the dark starts feeling like something other than the absence of light. She talked to a therapist for 6 weeks after October. The therapist was good, practical, she liked her. The therapist offered frameworks, stress response, highway hypnosis, sleep deprivation and its effects on perception. Carla engaged with all of these frameworks in good faith. She found them useful in daylight. In the dark, they did not help. She thinks about the woman behind the counter, the warmth of the smile, the specific efficiency of the movement, the pie. She thinks, whatever that was, it was very good at it. It had practiced. She thinks about the cup on the wrong side of the table. She has decided it was a mistake. Not her mistake. Its mistake. Whatever arranged that scene made one small error, moved one thing wrong, gave her the 2 seconds she needed to understand what she was looking at before she understood it consciously. She is grateful for the mistake. She is also aware that something capable of doing everything else it did should not have made that mistake. She is aware that things that are good at what they do not make that kind of mistake by accident. She has not figured out what to do with this awareness. She is working on it. She changed her route. She drives a different corridor now, farther north, different stops, different country. She has made a new list of stops she knows. She goes through her checklist at every one. She still feels safe on the road, most of the time. Most of the time. She checked the Texas Department of Transportation database after filing her report. Farm Road 612 in Care County. Mile marker 247. There is no commercial license for a food service establishment at that location. There never has been. The facts speak for themselves. But not every horror leaves a paper trail. Some of them leave only one witness. And one witness who will never fully sleep again. Story 5, The Man in the Walls. I want to tell you something before I begin. I want to tell you that I know how this sounds. I know I have always known that the version of events I am about to describe is not the version most people will accept. I have sat across from enough skeptical faces, enough careful, neutral, professionally sympathetic faces. I know what the careful, neutral face looks like when it is deciding between two explanations, and choosing always the one that requires less of it. Choose that explanation if you need to. I am past caring. What I know is this. The apartment on Vance Street was built in 1941. I know this because I researched it, obsessively, thoroughly, in the way I began doing everything obsessively and thoroughly after the first month, because obsession was a container and I needed a container. And the building permits and the original architectural drawings are available from the City Historical Society for a fee of $11, which I paid. The building is 6 floors, 32 units, load-bearing brick construction with a double-wall system that was standard for residential buildings of the era. An inner wall and an outer wall with a cavity between them, originally designed for insulation. The cavity between the walls measures, according to the original drawings, 14 inches. I did not know this when I moved in. I know it now. I know it now because I spent 6 weeks measuring it from the inside. To understand how we arrived here, you need to go back to the beginning. Though I will warn you, the beginning is not where the horror starts. The beginning is where I was still sure I was sane. Those two things are related. I understand that now. My name is not important. What is important? And I say this because the people who have tried to dismiss what I experienced have leaned heavily on the details of who I was before, as though who I was before explains what happened after, as though a person's history is a sufficient rebuttal to their testimony. What is important is that before I moved into the apartment on Vance Street, I was, by any measurable standard, well. I had a job I was good at. Technical writing, the production of clear, accurate documentation for software systems, which requires a specific kind of mind. Precise, patient, comfortable with complexity, resistant to assumption. I was good at it. My reviews said so year after year in the specific language of corporate performance evaluation that leaves no room for sentiment, exceeds expectations, rigorous, reliable. I had friends, a social life that was not spectacular but was genuine, people I met on purpose with pleasure on a regular basis. A brother in Portland I called on Sundays. A therapist I saw every other week, not because anything was wrong but because I had decided at 31 that maintenance was smarter than crisis management. An ex-girlfriend I was on good terms with. A cat named Linus who was 17 years old and required medication twice a day, and was, by any fair accounting, the closest relationship in my life and the one I am most sorry about, because of what happened to him later. I moved into the Vance Street apartment in September because my lease elsewhere had ended and the building was 3 blocks from my office, and the rent was manageable and the landlord, a man named Gerald Pitt who had owned the building since 1994, seemed decent. He was thorough in the lease signing. He pointed out all the standard things, the recycling schedule, the boiler timing, the buzzer system. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the building had old walls and old walls had their sounds, and he hoped that wouldn't be a problem. I said it wouldn't be a problem. I was correct. For approximately 3 weeks. The apartment was on the 4th floor. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, east-facing windows that caught morning light in a way I liked immediately. The particular quality of early light through old glass, slightly warped. The room made watery and new. I set up my desk at the window. I arranged my books. I found the good coffee place on the corner and established my morning routine. And within a week it felt like somewhere I lived, which is a thing that takes varying amounts of time, and this time was quick, and I took that as a good sign. Linus adapted within 2 days. He found the radiator by the bedroom window and installed himself beside it, and did not move except for meals. I was, in September, genuinely content. October, the 3rd week. The first sound was at night, late, after midnight, when the building was quiet and the street below had gone to the particular silence of a residential street after 1 a.m. The occasional car, the occasional voice, that loose ambient fabric of a city not quite asleep. It was a sound from inside the wall beside my bed, the east wall, the outer wall of the building. A sound that was not the creak of old materials in temperature change, which I was by then familiar with, which had its own rhythm and logic. This was different. This was, and I want to be precise because precision is what I have. Precision is all I have, rhythmic. Not mechanically rhythmic, organically rhythmic, the rhythm of something alive. A slow shuffling, a displacement, something shifting weight, that was the quality of it. Something settling or repositioning in a small space. I lay in the dark and I listened, and it stopped after perhaps 40 seconds, and I told myself, pipes, rodent, the building settling in the October cold. I had a list of explanations, all of them reasonable, and I ran through them and I went back to sleep. The second time was 4 nights later. Same wall, same time, longer this time, several minutes, and different, not just the shifting, something else underneath the shifting, woven through it that I would not name yet. I would not name it yet. I lay in the dark and I listed my explanations, and I was precise and reasonable, and I did not name it. I emailed Gerald Pitt the following morning. I described the sound carefully, technically, without the words I had not allowed myself. Pipes, possibly. Rodent issue. He replied within the hour. He appreciated me flagging it. He would have the building's contractor take a look. The contractor came 2 days later, checked the walls on my floor and the floor below, found nothing. Old buildings, the contractor said. They're full of sounds. You stop hearing them. I nodded. I said, right. I said, of course. I did not stop hearing them. The third time I got up. I pressed my ear directly to the wall and heard, very close, on the other side of the plaster, breathing. I want to be careful here. I want to be careful because this is where, every time I have told any version of this is where the face changes. The careful face, the neutral face, the face that has already decided. So let me say what I said then. Let me say it as precisely as I said it to myself, lying on my bedroom floor with my ear against the baseboard at 2 a.m. Because I was precise then too. I was still in that mode. I was still the technical writer with the good reviews. It could have been sound traveling through the structure from another unit. Buildings conduct sound in nonlinear ways. Whatever I heard as breathing could have been a neighbor sleeping, a fan, an appliance, filtered and shaped by 80 years of wall construction into something that pattern matched to breath in my tired, slightly frightened brain. I held it carefully. Do not think you are simply listening to a story. What I am telling you is real. It has always been real. And it is still happening right now, as I speak these words to you in the dark. November. I began measuring. Not because I had decided something was in the wall, because, and this distinction mattered to me then deeply, I needed to know the dimensions of the space between the walls in order to establish whether the sounds I was hearing were consistent with what was actually there. This is technical writing thinking. Verify before concluding. Get the dimensions. Work from the facts. The facts were, The wall cavity was 14 inches wide according to the original drawings. 14 inches, which is, I calculated this and then I sat with the calculation for a while, approximately the width of a turned human body. A person lying on their side. Narrow, very narrow, uncomfortable, but geometrically possible. I began noticing the pattern. The sounds came consistently between midnight and 3 a.m. They did not come every night, perhaps every third night. They lasted between 2 minutes and 15 minutes. They were always from the east wall. And I stopped using my list of explanations around the 3rd week of November. I stopped because the list had started feeling like a story I was telling myself about the sounds rather than a description of the sounds. The sounds were breathing, movement, and occasionally, briefly, quietly, at the very bottom of my hearing, something else. Something that sounded like a voice. Linus knew before I did. He had stopped sleeping by the radiator. He sat in the center of the bedroom and faced the east wall, and his ears were flat, which in a 17-year-old cat represents a degree of alarm I had never previously observed in him. He watched the wall the way you watch something you are waiting for. December, I stopped sleeping in the bedroom. I took my pillow and my blanket to the couch, and I told myself this was temporary, a week, until I had sorted out what was going on, until Gerald Pitt had brought in a pest control service, until the building's management had done something, anything, with the east wall. Gerald Pitt was patient and consistent. He sent the contractor again. He sent a pest control service. Both found nothing. The pest control service checked for rodents, no evidence. No nesting material, no droppings, no entry points. Old building, the pest control guy said. You'd be amazed what sound like in old buildings. January, the voice. I'm not going to dress this up. I was lying on my couch at 2 a.m. I had given up even trying to sleep before 2 a.m. by this point. I had simply reorganized my nights around the sounds, which was itself a kind of madness I was too close to see clearly. And the east wall was doing what the east wall did, the shuffling, the breathing, and then, quite clearly, a voice. One word. My name. Said the way you say someone's name when you want their attention. Not shouted, not whispered, said. I sat up. The building was silent. I sat up and I looked at the east wall from across the apartment, and I thought, with absolute calm, with the specific calm that arrives when you have been afraid for long enough that the fear has calcified into something else, something colder and stranger. It knows my name. The building at 1147 Vance Street has a documented history. I did not know this when I moved in. Gerald Pitt did not mention it. It is not the kind of thing landlords mention. The building was constructed in 1941. Its original purpose was residential. Between 1941 and the present, there have been 12 documented police responses to the building related to disturbances reported by tenants as originating inside the walls. The earliest is from 1958. The most recent, before my own report, is from 2019. They are spread across the building's history with no clustering, no pattern. 1958, 1967, 1971, 1983, 1984, 1991, 1999, 2003, 2007, 2011, 2015, 2019. In each case, the responding officer found nothing. In 3 of the 12 cases, the reporting tenant vacated their unit within 2 months of making the report. In 2 cases, the tenant broke their lease. In one case, 1983, a woman named Clara Donahue, Unit 4C, which is 1 floor below the unit I occupy. The file notes that the tenant was removed by emergency services following what the reporting officer described as a mental health episode. Tenant was found in unit, attempting to remove plaster from the east wall with her hands. Unit 4C is directly below my unit. Same wall. James Riley, 67, retired electrician, formerly of Unit 4C, 1970-91985. I don't like thinking about that building. I don't think about it if I can help it. But I'll say this. Clara was a normal person before she moved into that unit. She was my neighbor for 2 years, and she was a normal, quiet, capable person. What happened to her? Whatever she heard or thought she heard in that wall, it changed her. I saw it happen. It was gradual, and then it was all at once, the way those things are. James Riley moved out of 1147 Vance Street in 1985. He has not returned to that block. The building permit records show that in 1961, a structural modification was filed and approved for the east wall cavity on floors 3 through 5. The modification is described in the permit as remediation of access void. No contractor record accompanies the permit. The modification was signed off by a city inspector whose signature is illegible. Access void. I have spent considerable time with those 2 words. February, 8 months after I moved in. I was not sleeping. I was managing 6 hours in fragments on the couch, with the television on for the noise. I had requested a transfer at work, a different office, a different city, and been told it would take 3 to 6 months to process. I had begun looking at other apartments, but leases and deposits and the particular inertia of a person who is not operating at full capacity had conspired to keep me where I was. I was, by February, not entirely well. I know this. I am telling you I know this because the knowing does not change what happened. February 12th, a Tuesday. The sounds from the east wall that night were different. Not different in quality, the same breathing, the same shuffling weight, but different in proximity, closer, as though whatever was on the other side had moved to a different position relative to where I was lying. I was on the couch. The couch is against the interior wall, the west wall, which is across the apartment from the east wall. The sounds from the east wall had never, in all the months prior, seemed close on the couch. They were audible always, but they were there and I was here, and the apartment was between us. That night, the sounds were as close as though the wall behind the couch were the east wall. I sat up. I looked at the west wall. There was a pause, 3 seconds, 5. I have no reliable sense of the timing. And then, from directly behind the couch, the breathing. I left the apartment at 2:30 a.m. I took Linus in his carrier, and my keys and my phone and my coat, and I left, and I did not go back. I stayed in a hotel for 11 days while I arranged to break my lease. Gerald Pitt was, to his credit, reasonable about it. He did not ask for an explanation. I thought at the time that his not asking for an explanation was kindness. I have since revised this. I think he knew. I think he has always known, across his 30 years of owning the building, that certain units generate certain tenants who need to leave quickly and quietly, and that the way to manage this efficiently is to not ask the questions that produce answers he has already heard. The last thing I took from the apartment, I went back in daylight with a friend and was in the unit for less than 20 minutes, was a small section of plaster I had removed from the east wall in January. I had removed it with a screwdriver, very carefully, in a 2-inch square in the middle of the night, while standing in my bedroom telling myself I was verifying the dimensions of the wall cavity, telling myself this was research, this was technical, this was the fact-checking mind doing its work. Through the hole I made, in the cavity between the walls, I shone a light. The cavity was 14 inches wide, as the drawings indicated. And on the inside surface of the outer wall, the brick surface that faces the street, there were marks. Scratches, long parallel, at approximately chest height from the floor. The kind of marks made by something trying for a very long time, with considerable determination, to get out. I live in a different city now. The transfer came through in April. I live on the 7th floor of a modern building with poured concrete walls, no cavity, no history. I can hear my neighbors through the ceiling sometimes. I cannot hear anything through the walls. I still check. I still press my ear against the wall beside my bed in the dark before I sleep, and I listen. I have done this every night since February. I will probably do it for a long time. My therapist, a different therapist in this new city, who I found within the first week of arriving, is measured in his assessments. He uses phrases like hypervigilance and intrusive monitoring behavior, and these phrases are accurate and not inaccurate simultaneously, which is a thing I have grown accustomed to about the language around what happened to me. Linus died in March. He was 17 and unwell, and it was not unexpected. I sat with him at the vet, and I held him, and I was, for the first time since September, not thinking about the wall. I thought, this is grief. I know what this is. I know what is happening and why. It is sad and it makes sense. That clarity, knowing what a thing is and why it is the thing the apartment on Vance Street took from me. Not my sanity, not my grip on facts, just the ease of knowing. The ability to hear a sound in the dark and move immediately to the explanation without the pause, without the second of raw animal calculation, without checking. I check everything now. I will probably check everything for a long time. The unit at 1147 Vance Street, my unit, the one I left in February, was relisted for rent in March. It was rented in April. I know this because I checked. I don't know why I checked. Story 6, what they found in the deep cave. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. This number is so large as to be, for practical purposes, meaningless to human mind. The human mind did not develop to process scales of this magnitude. It developed to process the distance between a body and the nearest threat, the time between now and darkness, the gap between hunger and food. It developed for an immediate, local, brutally specific world, and then it found itself, quite suddenly in evolutionary terms, capable of measuring the age of everything. This capability is extraordinary. It has produced science and mathematics and medicine, and this account. It has also produced the capacity to understand, clearly, with numbers, with evidence, exactly how small we are. That understanding tends to be abstract, theoretical. We keep it at distance, the way we keep most things that would be unbearable if we let them come close. The team that descended into the Muruk cave system in Papua New Guinea in the spring of 2018 did not set out to confront that understanding. They set out to map the cave. By the time they came out, those of them who came out, the abstract had become immediate. The small had become personal. To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back to the beginning. Though beginning is a word I will use advisedly. What the Muruk expedition encountered predates that word in any sense that matters. The Muller Range of Papua New Guinea contains some of the least explored cave systems on Earth. This is a function of geography. The highlands are remote and access is logistically complex, and a function of the caves themselves, which descend to depths and extend to distances that make casual exploration not merely difficult but categorically dangerous. Several systems in the range remain unmapped below their first few hundred meters. The team assembled in January 2018 to conduct the first systematic survey of the Muruk system, named for the local Huli word meaning hollow place beneath, consisted of 5 people. Dr. Caroline Marsh, 44, karst geologist, University of Queensland, lead researcher, 12 years of cave survey experience across Southeast Asia, Central America, and Oceania. The architect of the expedition, the person who had secured its funding, the person who had read every available account of the Muruk system and understood better than anyone else on the team exactly what the survey would require. Thomas Agha, 38, cave diver and technical explorer, the only member of the team with experience in sump diving, the submersion required to pass through flooded sections of cave, originally from Lagos, based in Sydney, described by colleagues as someone with an almost physiological comfort in confined dark spaces. Dr. Yuki Sato, 36, microbiologist, Osaka University. Her specific interest was in extremophile organisms, life that exists in conditions hostile to most biological systems. She had published on cave-adapted microbial communities in Japan and Mexico. She was on the Muroc expedition, specifically because prior surveys of the system's upper sections had returned sediment samples with anomalous biological signatures that no subsequent analysis had been able to classify. Anomalous. That word appeared in 5 separate papers from 3 different research groups over a period of 12 years. 5 separate groups, 3 separate institutions, all describing the same material as anomalous. No one had gone deep enough to find its source. The 4th and 5th team members were local guides, men from the nearest Huli community, experienced in the high country and the upper cave sections. Hired for navigation and logistics support. They are named in the expedition records as Paul and David, surnames not recorded. They did not enter the cave below the first 100 meters. They had been told by their fathers and their fathers' fathers not to. This is relevant. The descent began on March 4th. The Muroc system opens on a limestone hillside at an elevation of approximately 2,400 meters. The entrance chamber is large enough to stand in and well lit by natural daylight for perhaps 30 meters of depth. Below that the passage narrows, the light fails, and the system becomes what it is: ancient, dark, extending downward into the mountain at angles that shift between the merely steep and the genuinely technical. The team's instruments recorded depth, temperature, humidity, air composition, and barometric pressure at intervals throughout the descent. These records survive. They form the most complete account of what happened because the team members themselves, in the way of people who have experienced something they cannot easily put into words, have been inconsistent in their verbal accounts. The first anomaly was at 340 meters depth. It was a sound. Dr. Marsh noted it in her field log at 11:47 a.m. on March 4th. Acoustic anomaly at approximately 340 m low-frequency vibration. Subauditory range, detected by equipment before any team member reported subjective awareness. Duration, ongoing. Source, undetermined. Not consistent with water movement, geological settling, or any cataloged cave acoustic phenomenon in my experience. She described it later, in the debriefing conducted by the University of Queensland 3 weeks after the expedition returned, as feeling like being inside something very large that was breathing very slowly. She used that phrase. She said she knew how it sounded. She used it anyway. Thomas Agha, in his own debriefing, described the same sensation but used a different word. He said it felt like attention. He said it felt like the cave was aware they were in it. Which is not a scientific statement, he said. I know that. I'm not making a scientific statement. I'm telling you what it felt like. Dr. Sato took samples from the cave walls at 340 meters. The samples were taken in sterile containers and sealed on site. They would be analyzed in Brisbane after the expedition. The samples were, all 8 of them, from 8 different points on the cave wall, identical. Not similar, identical. Identical biological material across 8 sites distributed over a 30-meter section of cave. No variation, no site-specific differentiation, as though the same organism occupied the entire surface without interruption, without the genetic drift that even closely related colony organisms exhibit over distance and time. Dr. Sato wrote in her field log, "This is not possible under standard models of cave microbial distribution. Making note for further analysis. Do not have an explanation." Day 2, 480 meters. They reached the first sump, the flooded section of passage where the cave dips below the water table, at 10:15 a.m. on March 5th. Thomas Agha performed the solo dive, trailing a guide line for the team to follow. The sump passage ran for approximately 22 meters before emerging in an air-filled chamber on the far side. He was in the water for 11 minutes. He did not speak for 4 minutes after he surfaced in the chamber on the other side. The others came through one by one, following the guideline. Dr. Marsh came last. When she emerged in the chamber, Thomas was sitting on a rock shelf at the edge of the water with his mask off and his hands resting on his knees, and he was looking at the far wall of the chamber. The chamber was large. The team's lights didn't reach the far wall. "Tom," she said. He looked at her. His expression was not frightened. It was, she said this carefully in her debriefing, choosing the word deliberately, recalibrated. Like someone who has just been given a piece of information that requires them to resort everything they thought they knew. "It's old," he said. She asked what he meant. "I don't know what I mean," he said. "I felt it in the water. What has been described is only the outermost edge of the truth. What lies beneath it is something for which no preparation is adequate. You were warned." The chamber beyond the sump was, the team's measurements confirmed this, approximately the size of a football stadium. It was beyond any previously known extent of the Muroc system. Their lights, combined, illuminated perhaps a fifth of it. The walls and floor and ceiling were covered in the same biological material Dr. Sato had sampled at 340 meters. The identical material, now at 480 meters, across every surface of a chamber that extended far beyond their instruments' ability to measure it. She took more samples. She did this automatically, the way scientists do in the presence of extraordinary things, with procedure as anchor. Dr. Marsh recorded the chamber's dimensions as best she could. She estimated the ceiling height at 40 meters minimum. She walked the perimeter of what her lights allowed her to see. At the far edge of her illuminated range, at the point where the chamber continued beyond visibility, the floor changed. It became not stone, not biological material, something else, something that the geologist in Dr. Marsh could not immediately categorize, which was not a sensation she was accustomed to, which she said later was the moment she first felt genuinely afraid. "I could not tell what I was looking at," she said. "Not chemically, not structurally. It was organic in some sense, but not in any sense I recognized. And it covered the floor as far back as I could see, which was not far enough." She did not go further. She made that decision consciously, standing at the edge of the known floor, looking into the dark that her light did not penetrate. She turned around. They camped in the chamber that night. They should not have camped there. The biological samples recovered from the Muroc expedition were analyzed at the University of Queensland School of Biological Sciences between April and September of 2018. The analysis was subsequently reviewed by external researchers at Cambridge and at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego. All three analyses returned the same fundamental findings, and all three were written with the specific hedged language of scientists confronting data that does not fit existing frameworks. The organism, if it is an organism in the sense that word conventionally applies, is unlike anything previously cataloged. Its cellular structure is not consistent with any of the known domains of life, not bacteria, not archaea, not eukaryota. It appears to metabolize using a chemical pathway for which there is no identified analog in the terrestrial biological record. Its estimated age, derived from analysis of its integration with the surrounding limestone, which permits carbon and radiometric dating of the material in contact with it, is in excess of 2.1 billion years. 2.1 billion years. For context, the first multicellular life on Earth appeared approximately 600 million years ago. The organism in the Muroc cave system predates multicellular life by a factor of more than 3. It was ancient before anything with more than one cell had ever existed on this planet. Dr. Yuki Sato, 36, microbiologist, University of Osaka, September 2018. I have been a scientist for 15 years. I understand the boundaries of what science is able to say. What I can say factually based on the data is that what is in that cave is older than almost everything that has ever lived on this planet, and it is alive. It is metabolizing. It is active. And based on the distribution patterns I observed, the coverage of the chamber surfaces, the uniformity, the absence of any variation, I believe it is a single organism. One organism, covering surfaces we were not able to fully measure, which means it is also very large. She paused. How large, I am not able to say. We did not see all of it. Dr. Saito has submitted a proposal for a follow-up expedition to the Murex system. The proposal has not been funded. The night they spent in the chamber, 4 people in sleeping bags on the stone floor of a space the size of a stadium, with the lights off to conserve battery, in a dark so complete it has a texture, and around them on every surface a 2-billion-year-old organism, metabolizing in the slow chemical language of something that predates everything that came after it. Dr. Marsh did not sleep. She said this without embarrassment in her debriefing. She lay in her sleeping bag in the absolute dark of the Murex chamber, and she did not sleep, and she thought about the floor at the edge of her light, and she thought about what Thomas had said in the water, and she thought, this is the word she chose. Again carefully, again knowing how it would be received, she thought about being known. That is the only way I can describe it. I felt known, not observed, known, as though whatever was around us had access to something more than my physical presence in that space. Thomas Agha's account of the night in the chamber is shorter. He has not given many interviews. What he has said consistently is, I don't think it was sleeping. I think it was paying attention. I think it has always been paying attention to everything for a very long time. I think we were interesting for approximately one night, and then we were not interesting anymore, and that is why we were able to leave. The question of what the organism perceives, whether perception is even a relevant framework for something of this nature, is not a question any of the analyses have been able to address. The physical data is extraordinary and inexplicable. The experiential data, what the team reported feeling in the chamber, in the water, in the cave, is not something the physical analyses engage with. Dr. Saito put it plainly in a lecture she gave in Osaka in November 2018, which was not recorded, but has been described by those who attended. Think of ancient things as passive, as inert. A fossil is a record, it does not look back, but this is not a fossil, it is alive. And I do not think 2.1 billion years of continuous living produces passivity. I think it produces something for which we do not have a word, something between awareness and indifference, something that notices without caring, because caring is a thing that small, brief organisms do. She paused. We are very small. We are very brief. It noticed us. I am not sure it cared. I am not sure which of those things frightens me more. The team ascended from the chamber on the morning of March 7th and reached the surface on March 8th. Paul and David, the local guides, were at the cave entrance. They had been waiting for 2 days. They did not ask questions about what the team had found. They asked only, "Are you all there?" They were asked why. Paul said Dr. Marsh recorded this in her field log, verbatim, that cave has kept people before. Not always, but sometimes. We wanted to know if it kept any of you. The Huli community in that region of the highlands has maintained a prohibition on entering the Murex system below the first chamber for as long as the prohibition has been recorded, which is the oldest recording in the Colonial Administrative Archive, at least 180 years. Oral tradition suggests considerably longer. The prohibition is not associated with any specific event. It is not framed as a response to a danger. It is framed as a recognition. You do not go into the deep part of the hollow place beneath, because the hollow place beneath is not empty and has never been empty, and what is there is old enough that it is better to let it be. 180 years of documented prohibition. community memory that may extend much further, and a biological organism that has been there for 2.1 billion years. The correlation is imperfect. The humans have been in that region for at most tens of thousands of years. The prohibition cannot extend back to the organism's beginning. What it represents is something more recent, a community arriving at a conclusion about what lives beneath them and deciding, as communities do, that the wisest relationship with certain things is distance. They were right. They have always been right. The funding proposal for a return expedition to the Murex system has been declined 3 times by 3 separate bodies. In each declination, the reason given is the same: insufficient evidence of scientific value, sufficient to justify risk. The organism is still there. It has been there for 2.1 billion years. It will be there long after the committees that decline the funding have ceased to exist. It does not require the expedition. Story 7, The Baby Monitor, Room 2. The monitor was on the nightstand. It was always on the nightstand. Sarah had put it there the day they brought Milo home from the hospital, and it had not moved since. Not once, not to dust under it, not when they painted the bedroom in October, not for any reason, because the monitor being on the nightstand was not a decision anymore. It was a fact about the bedroom the way the window was a fact and the door was a fact. The green light pulsed. Milo was breathing. The green light was how she knew. At 2:09 a.m. the green light pulsed. At 2:10 a.m. the green light pulsed. At 2:11 a.m. Sarah woke up. She did not know why she woke up. There was no sound. The monitor was showing green. The room was dark and still, and her husband Daniel was asleep beside her, making the small specific sounds he made when he slept, which she had catalogued without trying over 8 years of marriage, and which were, in their familiarity, a kind of lullaby. Nothing had woken her. Nothing was wrong. She lay in the dark and watched the monitor. Green, green, green. And then the monitor made a sound. Not Milo. She knew Milo's sounds, every register, every pitch. The difference between the cry that meant hungry and the cry that meant frightened, and the sound that meant he had simply woken up and was taking a moment to assess the situation before deciding how to feel about it. She knew all of it, had memorized it the way you memorize things that matter, without studying, without trying. This was not Milo. This was something underneath Milo. A sound in the room that the monitor was picking up that was not her son. Low, rhythmic, patient. She lay in the dark for a long time and listened to the green light pulse and the sound that was underneath everything else. And then she got up. To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back to the beginning. Sarah and Daniel Acaffer had moved into the house on Clement Drive 14 months before Milo was born, which meant they had 14 months to become the kind of people who know a house. Its sounds, its smells, the specific quality of light in each room at each hour of the day, the way the kitchen floor settles in cold weather, the pipe behind the second bathroom wall that makes a sound like a question mark at 6 a.m. when the neighbor upstairs starts her shower. They had used those 14 months well. They were the kind of people who use time well. Daniel was a project manager, organized by vocation and by nature, who made lists and kept them and found satisfaction in completion. Sarah was a pediatric occupational therapist who understood, in the precise professional way, how environments shape development, and who had applied this understanding to the house with the particular intensity of someone preparing a world for a person who did not yet exist. She had painted Milo's room twice before he was born. The first color wasn't right, not wrong exactly, but not right. She knew the difference. The second color was a soft gray-green that changed quality with the light in a way that seemed, to her, alive. That seemed like the room was breathing. She thought that later with a different feeling than she had thought it before. Milo was born in March. He was healthy, average weight, unremarkable in the medical sense and entirely remarkable in every sense that mattered. He came home, and he went into the gray-green room, and Sarah put the monitor on the nightstand, and Daniel installed the blackout curtains, and they organized their lives around the new fact of him in the methodical, slightly dazed way of new parents everywhere. The house was a good house. This is worth saying. It was not a house with a history, not a house she had ever felt uncomfortable in, not a house that had ever offered her anything other than the ordinary sounds of an ordinary structure going about its business in an ordinary neighborhood. She had never been frightened in it. She wanted to be clear about that. She had never been frightened in it before. It began in October. Milo was 7 months old. She heard it first on a Tuesday, just before 3 a.m., when she was already awake for his feeding. He had fed and gone back down, and she was in the nursing chair in the corner of his room in the dark, still, in that specific post-feeding stillness that is not quite sleep, but is not wakefulness either, her body doing the work of settling back toward rest while her mind drifted. The house was quiet, and then it wasn't. The sound was faint. It was below the threshold of what she might have registered if she hadn't been sitting in that particular quality of attentive quiet, in a room where she spent hours listening for small sounds. A low, rhythmic sound, like breathing, but deeper than a child's breathing, from somewhere in the room that was not the crib. She turned the chair light on. Milo was asleep. The crib was exactly as she had left it. The room was empty. She sat for another 5 minutes with the light on, listening. Nothing. She went back to bed. The following Tuesday, same time, same sound. She was in the chair again. Milo had not yet consolidated his sleep. She was still doing the 3 a.m. feed, and she heard it again, and this time she stood up immediately and walked the perimeter of the room with the light on and found nothing and stood in the center of the gray-green room at 3:12 a.m. and looked at the ceiling and the walls and the floor and found nothing wrong. She did not tell Daniel. She was not sure why. It was not a deliberate decision. He simply did not ask her how the 3 a.m. feed had been. Why would he? It was a thing she did every night. It rarely varied, and she did not volunteer it. The third time was a Saturday. She was not doing a feeding. She was asleep. The monitor woke her at 2:54 a.m., not with Milo's cry, nothing so legible as that, with the sound coming through the monitor from the room. She sat up in bed, and she looked at the monitor. The green light was pulsing. Milo was breathing. The sound continued underneath the breathing. She went to his room. She turned on the lamp. She stood in the doorway and looked at her son in his crib, asleep, chest rising and falling, perfectly fine, and at the empty room around him. And she listened with the lamp on and the room fully visible and no explanation unavailable to her. And she heard it. She heard it with the light on. That was the moment she understood it was not a sound she was going to explain. She moved the monitor to a different position. This was the first thing she did, a practical response. The response of someone who has not yet given up on practical responses. She moved it from the shelf near the crib to the top of the dresser across the room, thinking, it is picking up something from outside, from the street, from a neighbor. Different position, different range, problem resolved. The sound came through regardless. She had Daniel listen. She woke him on a Wednesday. The sound was coming through the monitor, she was certain. She had been lying awake for 40 minutes certain, and she said, listen. And he listened. And he lay beside her with his eyes open in the dark and the monitor on the nightstand between them, and the green light pulsed, and the sound came through it, low and rhythmic, from their son's room on the other side of the hall. Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, the pipes. She said, it's not the pipes. He said, the heating system, this time of year. She said, Daniel. He was quiet again. Then he said, I hear it. She told herself it was nothing. She was still telling herself that. And so was he now. They had the heating system inspected. They had a plumber check the pipes. They had the building inspector, the same one who had signed off on the house when they bought it, come through and walk every room, including Milo's, and tell them the house was structurally sound. No unusual voids, no unsealed spaces, nothing that should produce unexplained acoustic phenomena. Nothing. The inspector stood in Milo's gray-green room and looked at the walls and the floor and the ceiling with his flashlight and said, "Nice room," he said. "Good color," he said. "I wouldn't lose sleep over sounds in an older house. They all have them." The house was 11 years old. The sound continued through November. It was not every night. It was perhaps 4 nights in 7, always between 2 and 4 a.m., always from the monitor, always that quality, low, rhythmic patient that she had run out of alternative descriptions for, and so, privately, without saying the word aloud to Daniel or to anyone, she called what it was. Breathing. Something breathing in her son's room. And then on a night in late November, Milo changed. He had been a settled baby. Not perfectly settled, no baby is, but within the range of normal, within the range she knew professionally and personally. He woke for feeds and went back down. He napped on a predictable schedule. He was, developmentally, exactly where he should be. In late November, he stopped sleeping. Not all at once, not dramatically, he simply began waking. At 2 a.m., at 2:30, at 3. He did not cry when he woke. That was what Daniel noted first, that Milo was waking but not crying. He would go in to check and find Milo in the crib, awake, eyes open, looking at the corner of the room. The corner of the room that the monitor faced. Always the same corner. Looking at nothing. The monitor Sarah and Daniel were using was a standard video, an audio baby monitor. A model with a wide-angle camera, 2-way audio, and a sound-activated recording function that stored clips to a cloud account when audio above a certain threshold was detected in the room. Sarah checked the cloud account in December. She had not checked it before, had set it up when they bought the monitor, and then forgotten it existed, because the live feed was sufficient and the storage felt redundant. The account contained 847 stored clips. The monitor had been in the room for approximately 9 months. 847 clips. The storage threshold was set to activate on sounds above 45 decibels, roughly equivalent to a quiet conversation, well above ambient room noise. Milo's cries accounted for perhaps a third of the clips, normal baby sounds. She scrolled through them on her phone in the kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon while Milo napped, and she watched the timestamps accumulate, and she looked for the pattern she was afraid of and found it. The remaining clips, over 500 of them, were recorded between 2 and 4 a.m., every one, without exception. In each clip, the room was dark. The camera's night vision rendered everything in pale green. The crib was visible. Milo was visible asleep on his back, not moving. The sound that had triggered the recording was not Milo. She turned the sound up on her phone and she sat in the kitchen, and she listened to clip after clip after clip. In each one, that sound. From somewhere in the room the camera could not see, below the camera's angle. From the corner the camera was not pointed at. Breathing. 847 clips, 9 months. Sarah Acaffer, 33, pediatric occupational therapist, December 2023. The thing I kept thinking about, sitting there with my phone, it had been doing this since before Milo was born, since before we put him in that room. I had set up the monitor for a test before he came home, just checking it worked, and there is a clip from that night, from the empty room, from before he was ever in it. She stopped. The sound was already there. Sarah and Daniel Acaffer moved out of the house on Clement Drive in January 2024. They did not sell it. They are still paying the mortgage on it. They have not been back. December 11th. Sarah woke at 2:17 a.m. The monitor was on the nightstand. The green light was pulsing. Milo was breathing. She could hear his breathing in the monitor's faint hiss of white noise underneath everything else. She was going to close her eyes and go back to sleep. And then Milo spoke. He was 9 months old. He had no words. He had sounds, the prelinguistic range of a child moving toward language, the babble and the coo and the experimental consonants, but no words. She knew this. She was a pediatric occupational therapist. She knew developmental milestones with the precision of someone who had assessed hundreds of children against them. 9-month-old children do not have words. What came through the monitor was her son's voice. She knew his voice. She would know it in any register, in any context, under any conditions, forming something that was not babble, not the random articulatory play of a preverbal child. A word, one syllable, repeated 3 times. She cannot say with certainty what the word was. She has listened to the cloud recording. Yes, the monitor captured it. It is in the account, clip number 831. She has listened to it many times with Daniel, with her mother. Once with a linguist she found through a professional contact who agreed to listen without explanation. The linguist listened 3 times. Then she said, "It sounds like here," or possibly a word in another language that sounds like here. But the phonation it's very controlled for a child this age, very deliberate. Here, here, here. In her son's voice. From the corner of the room. Sarah went to the room. She opened the door and she turned on the lamp, and Milo was in the crib, awake, looking at the corner. The corner was empty. She stood in the doorway for a long time. Then she picked Milo up and she carried him to the master bedroom, and she put him in the bed between her and Daniel, and she lay there with her hand on his back, feeling him breathe, and she did not go back to sleep. She lay there and she thought about the 847 clips. She thought about the clip from the empty room, before Milo came home, before anything was in that room except the monitor and the gray-green walls and the corner that the camera did not point at. She thought whatever is in that room was there first. She thought we put our son in a room with something that was already there. She did not think it said here. She did not let herself think that. If she thought that, if she followed that thought to where it led, she would not be able to get out of bed in the morning, and Milo needed her to get out of bed in the morning. So she did not think it. She lay with her hand on her son's back. She felt him breathe. They stayed in the house for 3 more weeks after December 11th. This is the part that surprises people when she tells them, "Why didn't you leave immediately?" And the answer is what the answer always is. For people in houses, they cannot immediately leave. The lease, the mortgage, the practical weight of a life installed in a place, the hope that in daylight the thing will seem smaller, the hope that it was a one-time event, the specific hope of parents who cannot afford to upend their child's routine on the basis of something they cannot explain. Daniel wanted to believe the monitor was malfunctioning. He researched it. He found forums with other parents discussing unexplained sounds from the same model. He found 3 other accounts across 2 forums of parents describing sounds their monitors had captured that they could not source. He found this comforting. He brought it to Sarah. She read the accounts. All 3 described sounds in the 2 to 4 a.m. range. All 3 described a sound like breathing. 2 of the 3 mentioned a corner of the room. She did not find it comforting. They moved in January. Her mother's house, temporarily, with Milo's things packed in a weekend, while Daniel arranged a storage unit for the rest. They have not put Milo in a room with a corner the monitor does not cover. They have not put the monitor back on any nightstand. Sarah sleeps lightly and wakes at 2 a.m. most nights and lies in the dark and listens. And so far, in the apartment they are now in, the new place, the place with a different floor plan and different walls and no gray-green room, she hears nothing. So far, Milo is a year old now. He is developing normally. He has words, real ones, the standard first words, mama and dada and more and no. His developmental profile is exactly where it should be. He does not seem, by any measure Sarah knows how to apply, to have been harmed. She watches him sometimes in the new place, when he is playing on the floor and she is nearby. She watches him look at the corners of rooms. He does it less than he used to, but he still does it. Clip number 830. One is still in the cloud account. She has not deleted it. She does not know why she has not deleted it. When she thinks about deleting it, she thinks, what if someone needs to hear it? She has not yet decided who that someone would be. Story 8, the SKINWALKER of Route 9. What Ray Chi saw on Route 9 on the night of August 14th was not an animal. He has said this many times. He has said it to his uncle, who believed him immediately and without question, and whose face, when Ray described what he saw, went to a place Ray had never seen his uncle's face go before, still and old and deliberate. The face of someone filing something away in the part of the mind, reserved for the things you do not discuss casually. He has said it to two friends who did not believe him. He has said it once to a sheriff's deputy who wrote something down, and then said nothing and handed him a card, and told him to call if he had further concerns. He has said it in the years since, as rarely as he can manage, because saying it requires him to revisit the specifics, and the specifics are the thing he cannot clean from himself. What he saw on Route 9 was not an animal. What it had been once might have been. He was driving home from his cousin's place in Shiprock, late, past midnight. The long, empty stretch of Route 9 through the northwestern New Mexico high desert. A road he had driven hundreds of times. A road he knew the way you know roads you have driven in the dark since you were a teenager. And his headlights picked up something on the shoulder approximately 100 yards ahead. A shape. Large, on four legs initially, moving along the shoulder with a quality of motion that his brain processed first as wrong and only second as specific. The specific wrongness of something that was using four legs the way something that is usually two legs uses four legs, compensating, imperfectly. He slowed. He told himself, deer. He told himself, coyote, large coyote, the desert has them, they move at night. Sometimes they move in ways that read wrong in headlights because headlights are wrong light for living things. He slowed to 30 miles per hour. 60 yards. The shape stopped moving, still on four legs, and then, in the time it takes to blink, it rose. It rose to two legs. And it turned. And Ray Chi, who was 31 years old and had grown up on and near the Navajo Nation, and who had heard, since childhood, the things that were spoken about in certain tones, and then not spoken about further, the things that were acknowledged and then put away, Ray Chi understood what he was looking at before he had a name for it. He had a name for it. He pressed the accelerator to the floor, and he did not stop driving until he reached Farmington. To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back to the beginning. Ray Chi was 31, a civil engineer working for a firm in Farmington that handled infrastructure projects on and adjacent to the Navajo Nation. He had grown up in Shiprock, left for Albuquerque for college, come back as people who grow up in Shiprock often do, because it is a complicated place to leave permanently, after his father got sick and needed someone closer than Albuquerque. His father had recovered. Ray had stayed. He had established a life in Farmington that was neither the life he had imagined from Albuquerque, nor the life his parents had lived in Shiprock, but something in between, which is a kind of life that is common in places where the old world and the newer world exist in the same geography and negotiate constantly. He drove the route between Farmington and Shiprock often. His mother still lived in Shiprock. His extended family was there. He knew the road the way you know roads that connect you to people, not just the geography but the specific character of each stretch, the mile markers, the places where deer crossed at dawn. The long flat section after the junction where the sky got very large, and sometimes in summer the thunderstorms built up to the west, and you could watch the lightning work the desert from 20 miles away. He was not a nervous driver. He was not a nervous person particularly. He was, by the assessment of everyone who knew him, grounded and practical, someone who made decisions carefully and executed them well, whose instincts were good, who did not invent problems. He had heard, growing up, the traditional accounts, the warnings, the things his grandmother spoke about in the specific tone that meant, this is real and you will not question it, and you will not seek it out, and you will not repeat it carelessly. He had heard them, and he had respected them in the way that children raised between two epistemological worlds respect the beliefs of one world while being educated in the tools of another. He had not disbelieved. He had filed it. That night on Route 9, the filing cabinet opened. The first time something was wrong on Route 9, Ray almost didn't register it. It was 3 weeks before the night of August 14th, a Thursday in late July, driving back from Shiprock at about 11 p.m., and he saw on the shoulder, in the same general stretch of road, a coyote. Just a coyote. There was nothing immediately wrong about it. Coyotes were common on this stretch. He had seen dozens over the years. But this one was still. Not still in the way animals go still when headlights find them, that freeze, that assessment before flight. Still in a different way. Standing on the shoulder facing the road, not moving, not reacting to the headlights, watching the car pass with a quality of attention that was not the attention of a coyote. He passed it. He watched it in the rearview mirror. It turned to watch him go. He thought it's sick, distemper or something else that disrupts the normal startle response. He thought, I should call someone. Animal control, maybe, or the tribal wildlife office. A sick coyote on the road was a hazard. He didn't call. He forgot about it by the time he reached Farmington. The second time was a week later. Different animal, or the same animal, he couldn't know. A shape on the shoulder, further from the road this time, partly in the scrub. He saw it in his peripheral vision and then it was gone, and he told himself, coyote, nighthawk, any number of things that the dark makes ambiguous. He almost didn't tell his cousin about it that evening at dinner. He mentioned it as an aside, strange coyote on Route 9, kept seeing something in the scrub, and his cousin set his fork down and looked at him. What did it look like? His cousin said. Just a coyote, maybe. I couldn't get a good look. His cousin was quiet for a moment. Ray, he said, drive that stretch fast. Don't slow down, don't stop, and don't, he stopped. Don't what? His cousin shook his head. Drive it fast. Ray had not asked him to finish the sentence. He had driven home thinking about the unfinished sentence, and he had not driven slowly on Route 9 since that conversation, and he thought later that this was perhaps the most important thing he did in this entire account. He had not driven slowly until the night of August 14th. August 14th, leaving Shiprock at 12:30 a.m. after a late dinner at his mother's that had extended, as dinners at his mother's always extended, past any reasonable endpoint because she cooked the way she cooked and no one ever wanted to leave. The drive was familiar. The night was clear, the desert holding the heat of the day in its particular way. Even at midnight, the air was still warm through the open window, dry and mineral smelling. The smell of the high desert at night, which is one of the specific smells Ray had decided, years ago, he would always associate with home regardless of where he lived. He was thinking about nothing consequential, a project deadline, something his mother had said about his cousin's marriage, the specific mental texture of a person making a familiar drive, letting the mind idle. He was in the stretch he had been driving fast since his cousin's unfinished sentence, and his headlights swept the shoulder and he saw the shape, and he did what he had been not doing for 3 weeks. He slowed down. Not deliberately, not a decision. The shape was large enough that his foot eased off the accelerator before his mind had processed what it was, that reflexive conservation of momentum in the presence of an obstacle. 60 yards. On 4 legs, moving along the shoulder. He knew in the first second that it was wrong. He knows now, looking back, that he knew in the first second that the knowledge arrived before the conscious processing, the way certain kinds of knowledge do. He knew it was wrong and he slowed down anyway because the decision had already been made before the knowing arrived. And here is the part nobody talks about. The part that is left out every time this kind of account is shared, cleaned up, passed along. Nobody talks about the smell. He was 40 yards away when it rose to 2 legs and turned, and the window was open. And what reached him through the window, what the desert air carried to him in the 3 seconds he was closest to it before he floored the accelerator, was not the smell of an animal. It was the smell of an animal and something else, layered. The animal smell, the sharp organic smell of something large and furred, and underneath it, inseparable from it, the smell of the other thing, which was human. Sweat and skin, and something sour that was not sickness. Human. What he saw in the headlights, in the 3 seconds, was this. It was approximately 7 feet tall. Its legs were wrong, bent the wrong direction at the knee, like the hind legs of a deer configured on a frame that was built for something else. Its arms were too long. They hung past its knees when it stood upright. Its shoulders were wide and the fur, yes, or what appeared to be fur, covered most of it but not all of it. In the places where the fur was thin or absent, in the places where the headlights caught it directly. Skin. Human skin. The specific color of it. The specific texture, visible even at 40 yards in the headlights wash. Its face, Ray has said, every time he has described this, that he does not describe the face. He says, there was a face, he says. It was not an animal's face, he says. I'm not going to tell you what it looked like. He has kept this. In every account, every conversation, every time the question is asked, he keeps this back. He says he keeps it because it is the only part he can keep. Everything else is out there. The face is his. What he will say about the face is, it looked at him. It looked at him with the full, clear, deliberate attention of something that recognized him. The tradition of the Yi Nalblusha, the Navajo concept that has been described in English as the skinwalker, is not a folklore curiosity. It is a serious element of a complex spiritual and cultural system that does not invite casual outside examination. And the researchers and writers who have treated it as material for entertainment have done damage that is not easily measured. What can be said, carefully and with respect? The tradition is old. Its documented history and ethnographic accounts extends back to at least the 19th century, but its origins within Navajo cultural memory predate any written record. It describes a specific category of entity, or, more precisely, a specific category of human transgression that produces a specific category of consequence that is taken seriously by serious people. It is not, within the tradition, a ghost story. It is not metaphor. It is a practical concern with practical protocols, which is a distinction that matters. Dr. Maureen Trudell, an anthropologist at the University of New Mexico who has worked with Navajo communities for over 20 years, was asked to comment on accounts of Route 9 sightings. There are more than Ray Cheese, spread across a decade of reports, and declined to be recorded. Off the record, she said. The accounts from that stretch of road are consistent. The people reporting them are not coordinating. They don't know each other in most cases. They describe the same things in the same order. She paused. I'm not in the business of telling indigenous communities what their traditional knowledge means. I will say that when dozens of independent accounts describe the same entity in the same location over a decade and the details match, that's data. What you do with that data is a different question. Name withheld by request, Navajo Nation, 2022. I won't talk about what it is or where it comes from or what it wants. Those aren't things I'll say to an outsider, and I mean no disrespect by that. What I will say is this. That stretch of Route 9, people who are from here know to drive it fast. We have known that for a long time, longer than the road has been paved. Ray Chi drove to Farmington in 18 minutes on a road that normally takes 25. He parked in his apartment lot and he sat in his car with the engine running and the windows up, and he sat there for approximately 40 minutes, which he knows because he watched the dashboard clock. He did not call anyone. He did not get out of the car for the first 20 minutes. He sat and he looked at the parking lot and he breathed. And then, carefully, the way someone who has spent 31 years being a practical person applies that practicality even when everything underneath it has shifted, he thought about what he had seen. 7 feet tall, legs that bent backward, arms below the knees, fur that was not entirely fur, skin underneath that was human skin, a face that recognized him. He thought about all of this, and then he thought about one other thing that he had not allowed himself to think about during the drive, that he had driven fast to avoid thinking about, that he could now, in a lit parking lot in Farmington, look at carefully. When it turned, when it rose to 2 legs and turned and looked at him. In the 3 seconds before he accelerated, before the smell reached him, before the full shape of it was visible in the very first second, before anything else, what he saw was the shape of a man, standing on a desert highway in the middle of the night. Not a monster, a man. A man whose dimensions were wrong, whose posture was wrong, whose smell was wrong, who had been on 4 legs a moment ago, who was becoming something in front of his headlights or had already become it, and was wearing the remnant of what it had been, but a man. And Ray Chi is Dene. He grew up in Shiprock. He knows what his grandmother told him. He knows what a skinwalker is. He knows what it requires. He does not know the person. He is grateful for this. He is profoundly, specifically, physically grateful for this in a way he has never been grateful for anything. He does not know the person. He called his uncle the next morning. His uncle listened to all of it without speaking. When Ray finished, his uncle was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You didn't stop." "No," Ray said. "You didn't look at the face." Ray had looked at the face. He said, "No." His uncle said, "Good, then don't drive that road at night anymore." Ray said, "For how long?" His uncle said, "I'll let you know." It has been 2 years. His uncle has not let him know. Ray drives the long way now. It adds 40 minutes. He drives it without complaint, without impatience, in the specific way of someone who has done a cost-benefit analysis and arrived at a number that is not close. The thing about this kind of account, and Ray knows this, he is educated. He has read the way these stories get discussed in the spaces where outsiders discuss them. The thing about this kind of account is that there are 2 available containers for it. The first container is folklore, cultural tradition, stories that encode real social functions, the maintenance of boundaries, the consequences of transgression in narrative form, useful, significant, not literal. The second container is, it happened. Something was on Route 9 on August 14th. Something that should not be. Something that is not fully in any category that Western taxonomy has prepared. Ray Chi has lived with both containers. He is a civil engineer. He respects the first container. He uses the second one. The smell stays with him. He cannot account for the smell with the first container. Smell is not metaphor. Smell is chemical, physical, arriving through membrane and nerve. It is the oldest sense, the sense most directly wired to the brain's deepest structures, the sense least mediated by interpretation. He smelled what he smelled. He smelled an animal. He smelled a man. He smelled them layered together in the warm August air on a desert highway at 12:30 in the morning. And the layering was not 2 separate sources, not a coyote near a human, not coincidence of proximity. It was one source, one thing, 2 things in one body, and the body was not finished deciding which it was. He does not drive Route 9 at night. He has told his mother a vague reason, tired, the late drives aren't worth it, he'll come for dinner and leave early. She has accepted this without pushing. She is from Shiprock. She does not push certain things. She told him, the last time he was there for dinner, that she had heard there were people seeing things on Route 9 again. She said again with a specific weight. Ray looked at her. Again, he said. It goes in cycles, his mother said, in the matter-of-fact tone she used for things that were real and not available for debate. She put more food on his plate. Eat, she said, and come in the daytime. The smell of that night, the layered smell, animal and human, desert air and something older, Ray cannot describe it without it returning. He is describing it now. It is returning. Story 9, the DYATLOV Pass, Final HOURS. February 2 ND 1959. Northern URAL MOUNTINS. Soviet Union elevation 1,079 meters. Temperature -30 degrees Celsius. Wind speed estimated 50 to 70 kilometers per hour. 9 people entered a tent on the eastern slope of Khalat Siakal on the evening of February 1st, 1959. The tent was cut open from the inside. From the inside. That is where this begins. Not with the bodies, though the bodies are coming, and they are specific, and they will not resolve into anything comfortable, but with the tent. With the decision that 9 experienced Soviet mountaineers in -30 degrees Celsius, with nothing but darkness and snow on the other side of the canvas, made to cut their way out rather than use the door. The door was 3 feet from where the first cut was made. They cut through the tent. They ran. They ran in their socks, some of them in a single layer, into the dark and the wind and the snow and the -30 degrees that kills an unprotected human body in minutes, not hours. They ran from something. What they ran from was never officially established. The Soviet investigation into the deaths of Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustam Slobodin, Yuri Dorshenko, Yuri Krivonishenko, Nikolai Thiboks-Brignol, Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Alexander Kolvatov was closed on May 28, 1959. The cause of death was listed as an unknown compelling force. To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back to the beginning. The 9 members of the Dyatlov expedition were students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg. They were experienced hikers and skiers. The expedition was rated category III, the highest difficulty classification in the Soviet hiking certification system. They had earned the right to attempt it. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old, engineering student. By every account, his professors, his fellow hikers, the friends who were interviewed after, steady, methodical, the kind of person who prepared thoroughly and led from competence rather than charisma. He had organized and led multiple expeditions before this one. The group had been together, most of them, for years. They trained together. They had survived difficult terrain and difficult weather. They were not novices encountering their first hard night. They had among them everything required. They had tents rated for Arctic conditions. They had skis, ice axes, warm clothing in layers. They had maps and compasses and a route plan and a return deadline and people who knew where they were going and when they were expected back. They left Vizhai, the last inhabited settlement on their route, on January 28th. They were expected back on February 12th. When February 12th came and went without contact, a search party was organized. The search party found the tent on February 26th. February 26 th 1959, the tent. The tent had been set on the slope in a way that experienced mountaineers identified immediately as unusual. The group had stopped short of the pass they were heading for, on an exposed slope with no natural shelter, when a forested valley with wind protection was less than 1.5 miles further on. The experienced members of the search party noted this. There was no clear reason to camp on the exposed slope rather than in the valley. The tent was buried partly under snow. When the search party cleared it, they found it cut from the inside in 2 places. Personal belongings were still inside. Food, shoes, warm clothing. The items a person takes with them when they leave a tent were inside the tent. The tracks of 9 people led away from the tent down the slope toward the tree line, toward the forest, away from shelter, not toward it. The tracks were of people walking, not running. The investigators noted, walking, in a line mostly, some overlapping. They had walked into minus 30 degrees without their boots. They had done this calmly enough to leave walking tracks. Something had made this the better option. The first 5 bodies were found between February 26 and March 4th. Igor Dyatlov, found 300 meters from the tent, on his back, arms raised slightly as though he had fallen while moving uphill while trying to return to the tent. His expression, investigators noted this, was described by the first searcher to find him as determined, not frightened, not agonized, determined. Zinaida Kolmogorova, found 630 meters from the tent, also on her back, also with signs of having tried to return to the tent when she died. Rustam Slobodin, found between Dyatlov and Kolmogorova, face down, a fracture to his skull not caused by external impact. The medical examiner determined, internal, as though pressure had been applied. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, found together at the tree line beneath a large cedar tree, burns on their hands, burns consistent with having held burning branches directly, not dropped them, held them. Branches had been broken from the cedar at a height of up to 5 meters. They had climbed the tree in the dark, in the cold, without boots, and broken branches from it while it was on fire. They had been looking at something. The investigators determined they had been in the tree, looking at something, while holding burning branches. The remaining 4 were found in May, after the snow melted sufficiently to locate them. They were in a ravine approximately 75 meters from the cedar tree, under 4 meters of snow. These 4 had not died of hypothermia. Nikolai Thiboksbrignol, skull fracture, massive. The kind of force required to produce this fracture, the medical examiner wrote, would be comparable to a car accident. There was no external wound, no bruising of the scalp consistent with a blow. The damage was internal. Something had compressed the skull from outside without breaking the skin. Lyudmila Dubinina, 4 broken ribs on the left side, 2 broken ribs on the right side. The same qualifier, force equivalent to a car accident. No external wound. Her tongue was missing. Her tongue, her eyes, and the soft tissue around her lips had been removed. The medical examiner noted that this had occurred while she was alive, or very shortly after death, because of bleeding patterns in the surrounding tissue. The medical examiner did not suggest a mechanism. Semyon Zolotaryov, 5 broken ribs, same characteristics, same absence of external wound. Alexander Kolvatov, no major skeletal trauma, soft tissue damage, specifically around the neck, that the examiner described as consistent with violent displacement but of indeterminate cause. What I am about to tell you is documented, on record, in files technically public but practically inaccessible. I found them, read every page. Because what happened once is still happening. The investigation lasted 3 months. It was conducted by Lev Ivanov, a senior investigator for the Sverdlovsk Regional Prosecutor's Office. Ivanov interviewed survivors of other expeditions who had been in the region that winter. He collected weather data. He examined the physical evidence, the tent, the bodies, the clothing, the equipment, with the thoroughness his training required. His case file runs to several hundred pages. It was classified in 1959. It was declassified in 1990 and has been available, with some redactions, since. The unredacted portions do not resolve the case. The redacted portions, what can be inferred from their shape, from the questions they interrupt, from the testimony fragments that end mid-sentence and resume on a different line, suggest that Ivanov found something he was not permitted to document. What is known? In 1990, after the file was declassified, Ivanov gave an interview to a Soviet newspaper. He was 69 years old. He had kept the case with him for 31 years. He said in the interview that the physical evidence pointed to something he could not name in 1959. He said he had been instructed to name it something else, which he had done, and that the something else, the unknown compelling force, was the most accurate thing he was permitted to write. He said the bodies in the ravine, the 4 with the internal injuries, the injuries that required car accident force but left no external marks, were not consistent with any natural phenomenon he had been able to identify. He said, the force that caused those injuries acted from outside the body without touching the surface. I do not know what produces that. I do not know of anything that produces that. He said, I believe they saw something at that pass. He was asked what he believed they saw. He said, I believe they saw something that is not supposed to be seen, and I believe it knew they saw it. He died in 1997. He gave no further interviews on the subject after 1990. The Hanti people, the indigenous inhabitants of the northern Ural region, have a name for Khalat Siyakl. The name translates in Russian as Dead Mountain. In the Hanti language, more precisely, it translates as the Mountain of the Dead Nine. The mountain had that name before 1959. Before the Nine. What nine it originally referred to has not been established. The physical evidence of the Dyatlov case has been examined by investigators from 3 countries across 65 years. The case was formally reopened by Russian authorities in 2019. The 2019 investigation concluded in 2020 with a finding of death by avalanche. 12 separate avalanche experts, consulted independently, found no physical evidence consistent with an avalanche at the site. The snow on the slope where the tent was pitched showed no displacement pattern consistent with avalanche activity. The tent itself, while partially buried, was not crushed or deformed in the way avalanche-buried structures are crushed and deformed. The tracks leading away from the tent, the walking tracks of 9 people, were preserved in a way inconsistent with an avalanche having occurred. The 2020 conclusion stands nonetheless. Dr. Pyotr Baranov, 71, forensic pathologist, St. Petersburg, 2019. The rib fractures in the Dubinina and Zolotaryov cases are not consistent with avalanche compression, blunt force trauma, animal predation, or any mechanism I have been able to identify in 40 years of forensic work. The force that caused them was precise. It was applied in specific locations. It did not damage surrounding tissue at the surface. This is not how avalanches work. This is not how anything I know works. Dr. Baranov submitted his findings to the 2019 Russian investigation. His findings were not cited in the final report. The radiation. This requires its own paragraph. Several items of clothing recovered from the 4 bodies in the ravine tested positive for radioactive contamination. Specifically, beta radiation at levels described by the examiner as medium and above normal background. The source of the contamination was not identified. The testing was conducted in 1959, and the results appear in the original case file. The 2019 reinvestigation did not address the radiation. It did not address it. In a 60-year-old unsolved case involving 9 dead experienced hikers, several items of radioactively contaminated clothing, and internal injuries that no forensic pathologist in 4 decades of examination has been able to explain. The radiation was not addressed. KHOLAT-SYAKHL, still there, still named what it was named before the 9. Lyudmila Dubinina was 20 years old. This is the fact that stays with every person who reads deeply into this case. Not the radiation, not the internal injuries without external wounds, not the missing tongue. 20 years old, an economics student, By the accounts of everyone who knew her, thorough, determined, physically capable, not someone who frightened easily. She had completed multiple Category II expeditions before this one. She was, by the standards of the group, experienced. She was 20 years old and she died in a ravine in the northern Urals in February, in the dark. And whatever happened to her body happened while she was alive or within moments of death, which means she was alive when it began, which means she knew. She knew what was being done. This is the thing the case file cannot accommodate. Not the how is unanswered and may remain unanswered, but the experience. The specific lived experience of a 20-year-old woman in the dark and cold at the bottom of a ravine in 1959, aware of what was happening. The investigators found near her body an impression in the snow, a large impression, not human-shaped in any way the investigators could categorize. They photographed it. The photograph is in the original case file. The photograph has been redacted in the publicly available version. What the other four, Doroshenko and Krivonishenko at the cedar tree, in the tree, holding burning branches at 5 meters height, what they were looking at when they climbed and broke and burned. One theory, carefully argued by a researcher in 2013, using the angular position of the tree relative to the ravine, suggests they were looking toward the ravine. They were in the tree on fire, watching the ravine, watching what was happening in the ravine, and they stayed in the tree. They did not come down. Whatever was in the ravine, whatever was producing the sounds or the light or the whatever, was that kept two experienced men burning in a tree 40 meters away, was not something they chose to approach. They burned, they held the fire, they watched. And then they fell. And whatever was in the ravine finished what it was doing and moved on. And the snow came. And the Urals kept their winter. And the 9 were there until spring found them. The pass where this happened, the route the group was attempting, was named after Igor Dyatlov following the discovery of the bodies. It is now called Dyatlov Pass. It appears on maps. Hikers have returned to it. There is a monument near the tree line. People go there. This is worth saying plainly. People go there. They hike to the pass and they camp near where the tent was and they take photographs, and some of them sleep on the slope and wake in the morning and nothing happens. This is true. It happens regularly. The pass has become a destination for a specific kind of traveler who wants proximity to the unresolved. Most of them are fine. In 2016, a group of 4 experienced hikers, 2 Russian, 2 German, attempted to retrace the original Dyatlov route in winter conditions for documentary purposes. They reached the pass, they filmed their approach, they set up camp. Their footage from the first night of camping, they had cameras running on timers, shows the 4 of them in their tent until approximately 2:14 a.m. At 2:14 a.m. the footage shows all 4 sitting upright simultaneously. The camera ran for another 40 minutes. The tent was empty for all 40 minutes. The 4 hikers were found the following morning at the tree line, cold, disoriented, with no memory of leaving the tent. One had a nosebleed that had started during the night and dried. One had mild frostbite on 2 fingers. None of them could explain how they had gotten to the tree line. None of them had cuts on their feet. They had walked through snow in their socks. They did not make the documentary. The case file for the Dyatlov incident includes, on its second page, a list of the 9 victims. Next to each name is their age. The youngest was 20. The oldest was 30. Underneath the list, in handwriting that does not match Ivanov's and has never been attributed to any identified person who worked the investigation, someone wrote 4 words. The words are, "They did not run." Story 10, the mirror that showed tomorrow. The mirror showed me Thursday before Thursday arrived. I want to be precise about this. Precision is the only thing I have left that resembles sanity. and I am holding it carefully with both hands, the way you hold something that has already proven it will break. So let me be precise. The mirror showed me Thursday. I saw it on Wednesday. I saw myself, my own face, my own room, the window behind me with its particular quality of morning light, and I saw the date. Not in the mirror. The date was not in the mirror. It was on the laptop on my desk, which was visible over my left shoulder in the reflection. The laptop screen was open to my email. I could see the header of an email I had not yet received. The date on the email was Thursday, November 14th. It was Wednesday, November 13th. The mirror was showing me tomorrow. I know what you are thinking. I thought it too. I thought, the date is wrong on the laptop. The system clock needs resetting. I misread it. It was dark in the room and I was tired, and the human brain makes reading errors, particularly in peripheral reflection. I thought all of these things, arranged them in a careful line, walked along the line and checked each one. The date was right on the laptop. I had not misread it. I was not that tired. And the email in the reflection, the one with the November 14th header, was from an address I did not recognize, with a subject line I could not fully read from the angle, and when I turned to look at the screen directly, the inbox was empty. That was the first time. To understand how we arrived here, you need to go back to the beginning. Though I want to warn you, and I mean this sincerely, in the way I mean everything now, which is with the full weight of someone who has learned the cost of not meaning things. The beginning is not a comfortable place. I was a different person at the beginning. I was not better, but I was easier. My name is not something I will share here, for reasons that will become clear. What I will share is this. I am, or was, the tense is complicated, a moderately successful graphic designer working from a home studio in a mid-sized city in the Pacific Northwest. I had a life that could be described, accurately and without irony, as good. Not exceptional, not ecstatic. Good in the sustainable, daily way that I had come to understand was better than exceptional and more durable than ecstatic. I had friends I saw on purpose. A sister in Portland I called every Sunday. A morning routine that involved good coffee and a 40-minute walk, and the particular quality of Pacific Northwest morning light that had been one of the main reasons I had ended up here. Because light is a thing I pay attention to. I pay attention to light, to the quality of it, the angle, the way it changes through glass, because of my work. Graphic design is, at its foundation, a discipline of attention, proportion, negative space, the relationship between what is present and what is not present. I have trained my eye over years to notice what other people's eyes move past. This is relevant. The mirror was in the studio. It had been there when I moved in, a large, late Victorian piece, dark wood frame, heavy enough that I never bothered moving it despite it taking up wall space I occasionally needed. The landlord had left it, which I gathered meant he couldn't move it easily either. I had grown accustomed to it in the way you grow accustomed to large permanent things. It became part of the room's geography, something I oriented around without noticing. I had occupied the studio for 3 years before the mirror showed me anything. 3 years. I want you to hold that. 3 years of passing that mirror every day. 3 years of checking my reflection in the morning, of catching peripheral glimpses while I worked, of existing in the same room with it in the easy, unexamined way that you exist with furniture. And then November. And then Thursday before Thursday. Last Thursday, I stood in front of the covered mirror at 3 a.m. And the figure on the other side of the sheet, the thing I can feel but cannot see, was not in the doorway. It was not across the room. It was right there, on the other side of the fabric, an inch away. Almost there. 2 more. The quiet ones are always the worst. The email arrived Thursday morning. I was at my desk, coffee going cold beside me, working on a project that required the specific quality of concentration that makes time soft, That state where 40 minutes passes like 10 and you look up surprised by the light. I looked up. I looked at the inbox. The email was there. From an address I did not recognize, with a subject line I could now read in full. Have you seen it yet? I stared at it for a long time. Then I looked at the mirror. The mirror showed me at my desk, the window behind me with its morning light, the laptop screen over my left shoulder with the inbox visible, the email in the inbox. The email I had just received. Not a future email. This email. I sat with this for a while, the specific quality of sitting that is not sitting still. That is the body very carefully not moving while the mind goes several places very quickly. I thought, it showed me this email yesterday. It showed me this email before it arrived, which means either. And here is where the thinking became difficult, because either the mirror had shown me a real future event, which was not possible, which I was not going to accept, or the mirror had somehow shown me the email being composed, being sent, existing before I received it, which was also not possible, or I had, and this was the option I landed on and stayed on for a while. For the purposes of functioning, I had made an error. I had misread the date on Wednesday. The email had existed somewhere on Wednesday, and my tired peripheral vision had assembled a plausible-looking future from the available pieces. I opened the email. It said, "You're looking at it the wrong way." Nothing else. No signature. The address, I examined it, the domain, was a string of random characters at a service I had never heard of, untraceable in the practical sense. I did not reply. I looked at the mirror. The mirror showed me at my desk, looking at the mirror. I looked fine. I looked in the mirror like a person who was fine. I did not feel like a person who was fine. The second time was different. Not different in kind, still the mirror, still the reflection showing something that had not yet happened, but different in what it showed. And the difference in what it showed is the thing that unraveled me. Because the first time it was a date, an email, impersonal, verifiable, the kind of thing you can argue yourself out of. November 19th, a Tuesday. I was in the studio, late afternoon, the light going amber through the west-facing window, and I was standing in front of the mirror, deliberately, which I want to note, I was there deliberately because I had started doing that. Started standing in front of the mirror with intention rather than passing it, started watching it, and the mirror showed me my reflection. Normal, myself, the room behind me. And then, over my left shoulder, in the doorway of the studio that leads to the hallway, a person. Standing in my doorway. I turned around. The doorway was empty. I turned back to the mirror. The reflection showed the empty doorway. Do not think you are simply listening to a story. What I am telling you is real. It has always been real. And it is still happening right now. As I speak these words to you in the dark, I need to describe what I saw in the doorway in the mirror with the precision I have committed to. It was a person in the sense that the shape was human, standing height, 2 arms, head, the posture of someone not threatening, not aggressive, waiting. The posture of someone who has knocked and knows you are home and is waiting for you to acknowledge them. I could not see the face. Not because of shadow, not because of angle. Because, and this is the part I have the least language for, the face was the part of the reflection that the mirror would not resolve. Everything else was clear. Sharp, in fact, sharper than my mirrors usually are, the kind of clarity that made me aware again, trained eye, attention to visual precision, that the image was very deliberate. The face was not. The face was the part that was not yet decided. That was the word that arrived and has stayed. The face was not yet decided. What I did next is the part I least want to share. I sat down in front of the mirror, on the studio floor, cross-legged, and I watched it. I watched it the way I have asked myself what I was doing over and over, and the best I can produce is this. The way you watch something you are trying to understand before it understands that you understand it, which makes no logical sense, which I know, which describes exactly what I did. I sat on the floor for 2 hours and I watched the mirror. The figure in the doorway of the reflection did not move. It waited. I was the one finally who stopped. There are documented traditions across multiple cultural frameworks of mirrors as objects of what is variously termed scrying, divination, precognition, or simply seeing. The specific belief that mirrors can reveal futures, reveal presences, reveal things that the direct eye cannot or should not access. This is not an eccentric or marginal belief. It appears in medieval European practice, in Islamic traditions of mirror gazing, in cultures across sub-Saharan Africa, across South and East Asia, in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. The persistence and distribution of this belief does not validate it, but its persistence and distribution are themselves a fact that requires some accounting. Dr. Miriam Voss, a cultural historian at Reed College who specializes in the intersection of object belief and perceptual psychology, was asked about mirror folklore in an interview published in 2021. Dr. Miriam Voss, 52, cultural historian, Reed College, 2021. What I find interesting is not the supernatural claim but the perceptual one. Mirrors produce a specific cognitive dissonance. They show you yourself reversed, which the brain has to continually process and correct for. That processing leaves a kind of gap, a moment where the brain is working hard to reconcile what it expects with what it sees. Whether anything moves into that gap from outside, I'm not in a position to say, but the gap is real. The cognitive gap is neurologically documentable. Dr. Voss was shown the mirror in question in January 2024. She examined it for approximately 15 minutes and said nothing afterward for several minutes. She has not published anything about the visit. The mirror itself provenance traced through the landlord to an estate sale in 2009, the estate of a woman named Margaret Corbett who died at 91. No further history recoverable, is an ordinary mirror in the physical sense. Silver backing on plate glass. The frame is Victorian, as I estimated, likely 1880s to 1890s. Nothing in its physical composition is unusual. What is in the silver, what was ground into the glass, what has accumulated over 140 years of reflections. This is not a question that glass composition analysis can answer. December 1st. I want to be honest about what my life looked like by December 1st. I want to be honest because the narrative of these things always includes a point where the person tells you how bad it got, and I always read those accounts and think, they're softening it. They're giving me the version that still makes them seem functional. I was not entirely functional by December 1st. I was sleeping badly and working worse, and the 40-minute morning walk had stopped around November 22nd because walking took me away from the mirror, and by November 22nd, I did not want to be away from the mirror for 40 minutes. I want to examine this impulse even now, and I cannot do it cleanly. It was not that I wanted to see what it would show me next, or not only that. It was something more uncomfortable than curiosity. It was, the word that comes is obligation, as though the mirror and I had entered an arrangement I had not consciously agreed to, but was nonetheless bound by. I understand how that sounds. December 1st. I was in the studio at 3 a.m. I had not planned to be in the studio at 3 a.m. I had been in bed, not sleeping, and I had come to the studio for a glass of water. The kitchen is off the studio. This is the floor plan, and I had stopped in front of the mirror. The mirror showed me the studio. The mirror showed me at the mirror. And then behind me in the reflection, the figure again, in the doorway, waiting, the face not resolved. And then it took one step. Into the room. I watched it take one step into the room in the mirror, and I felt, this is the only accurate description. I felt welcomed, not threatened, not frightened. Welcomed the way you feel welcomed when someone you have been waiting for finally arrives, when something that has been pending finally resolves. And I understood, in the way you understand things at 3 a.m. that the 3 p.m. version of you can argue against but cannot fully dismiss. That the mirror had been showing me this figure since November because it was trying to prepare me for something. That the figure had been in the doorway for weeks because I needed to become accustomed to it before it came closer. That it was a patient, that the patience was a kindness. I stood in front of the mirror at 3 a.m. in December, and I felt grateful. I called my sister the next morning. I told her everything. I told her from the beginning, from the email from Thursday before Thursday. I told her about the figure in the doorway. I told her about December 1st. I told her I had felt welcomed. She came from Portland the next day. She stayed for 2 weeks. She made me cover the mirror. I want to be honest about this too. I did not want to cover it. I covered it because she was there and she was frightened, not for herself, for me. The specific frightened quality of someone watching a person they love become someone they do not recognize. And because some part of me, the part that makes calls to sisters, had known to call her. We used a bedsheet. We draped it over the frame. That first night, with the mirror covered, I slept for 9 hours. I had not slept 9 consecutive hours since October. I should have been relieved. I was bereft. The mirror is still in the studio, covered. The bedsheet has not been removed. My sister made me actually promise, with words out loud, in the way we had not made promises to each other since we were children, that I would not remove it without calling her first. I have kept that promise. I have also, and I am not proud of this, and I am telling you because precision is what I have stood in front of it. Covered, the sheet is opaque. I cannot see anything through the sheet. I stand in front of it and I cannot see anything. But I can feel the figure on the other side of the sheet. Not always, on some evenings at certain hours, the sense of someone on the other side of a closed door, not threatening, waiting. Still patient, still somehow giving me time. I do not know what it is giving me time for. I do not know what it wants me to be ready for. I do not know, and this is the question that keeps me from sleeping, some nights, from the deepest and most honest part of what this experience has left me with. I do not know if the thing it is giving me time for is something it intends to do to me, or something it intends to show me. And I do not know which of those I should fear more. The email, the first one, have you seen it yet? I replied to it in January. Months later, I wrote one line. I wrote, "What am I looking at the wrong way?" The reply came in 40 seconds. It said, "You think it's showing you the future. It's showing you what's already there. The future is just when you'll be ready to look at it directly." I have not replied again. I read it every day. Story 11, the empty chair AT breakfast. The chair was at the table. It had always been at the table. 4 chairs, 4 sides, 1 table, the kitchen table that had come with the house, the way the mirror in the hallway had come with the house, and the hook by the back door had come with the house. Things left by previous occupants that had simply been absorbed into the life of the current ones. Ellen had never chosen the chairs. She had simply kept them. On the morning of March 4th, the chair on the north side of the table, the side that faced the window, the side that caught the morning light, was pulled out. Not far, 6 inches, maybe 8. Pulled out from the table, the way you pull a chair out when you are about to sit down. Ellen stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at it. She had come down alone. Tom was still asleep. The kids, Nora, 14, and Ben, 11, she had heard neither of them yet, and the sounds of Nora waking were specific and reliable, and Ben slept like something sedated, and the house had been quiet when she came downstairs. The chair was pulled out. She stood in the doorway and looked at it, and then she walked to the counter and started the coffee. She did not push the chair back in. She was not sure why she didn't push it back in. She made her coffee and she sat in her chair, the south side, her side. The side with the chip in the armrest where Ben had thrown a toy car when he was 4. And she drank her coffee, and she looked at the pulled-out chair across the table, and she thought about nothing in particular. When Tom came down 20 minutes later, he looked at the chair and said, "Did someone get up early?" Ellen said, "No." Tom looked at the chair for another moment, and then poured his coffee. Neither of them said anything else about it. To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back to the beginning. The Marsh family had lived in the house on Orchard Street for 7 years. Long enough that the house was not a house they lived in, but a house that was theirs. Theirs in the specific way that time makes things yours, through the accumulation of ordinary mornings and difficult winters, and the particular incidents that mark years. The summer Ben broke his arm, the year Nora had the friend trouble. The January Tom was out of work for 3 months, and they had eaten a lot of pasta, and watched a lot of television, and come out the other side held together by something they could not name but could feel, the specific tensile strength of people who have decided to remain. Ellen worked 3 days a week at a dental office on the east side of town, scheduling and billing, work she was good at, and did not love and had made a reasonable peace with. Tom was a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm. He left at 7 and returned at 6, and on Fridays he stopped for beer with colleagues and came home at 7:30 with the slightly loosened quality of someone who has been briefly reminded that he exists outside of this house. Nora was 14 and largely absent in the way 14-year-olds are absent, present in the house, but conducting her real life somewhere interior and digital and inaccessible. She was not unhappy. Ellen could tell the difference. She was simply in the process of becoming someone else and doing the bulk of that work alone, which was appropriate, which was exactly what 14 was for. Ben was 11 and loud and physically reckless in the way of boys who have not yet made peace with their body's limits, who treat every surface as something to be climbed and every object as something to be thrown. He had broken one window, one vase, and his own arm, the summer of the arm. He was deeply beloved. The house was ordinary. The life was ordinary. Ellen knew this about it and found it mostly sufficient. There were mornings when the ordinariness pressed on her in a way that felt like weight, the specific weight of a life that is fine and will continue to be fine and will not surprise her. But these mornings passed, and she did not dwell on them. She was not the kind of person who dwelled. Until the chair. The second time was a week later. She came down at 6:20 a.m., earlier than usual. Something had woken her, some sound or the absence of sound, the specific wakefulness that does not come from a reason you can identify, and the chair was pulled out again. Same chair, same 6 to 8 inches, same angle. She noticed this time the angle. The chair was not pulled straight out from the table. It was pulled at a slight angle, toward the window, the way you pull a chair when you intend to sit facing slightly sideways, to look at something other than what is directly in front of you. To look at the window. She stood in the doorway for longer this time. The window faced the backyard. In March at 6:20 a.m., the backyard was dark, not fully dark. The eastern sky was beginning, but the yard itself was shadow. The oak tree and the fence line and the patch of lawn that Ben had destroyed over 3 successive summers with successive projects, and that she kept meaning to reseed. She looked at the window. The window looked back. She pushed the chair in firmly, flush with the table, and made her coffee. She did not mention it to Tom. She mentioned it to her friend Carrie at lunch on Wednesday, in the way she mentioned things to Carrie sideways as part of a larger conversation, so that if Carrie found it strange, she had not committed to it being strange. She said, "The weirdest thing, our kitchen chair keeps being pulled out in the morning." She said, "One of the kids must be getting up in the night." Carrie said, "Kids are so weird." Ellen said, "Right." She went home and she asked Ben if he'd been getting up at night. Ben looked at her with the authentic blankness of a child who has done nothing and knows it. No, he said. Why? She asked Nora. Nora looked up from her phone. What? No. Why would I go downstairs at night? She asked Tom. Tom said it's probably just settling. Houses settle, chairs move. Ellen said, chairs don't move. Tom said, the floor might be slightly unlevel. We've always known the kitchen floor is slightly unlevel. Ellen had not always known this. She was not sure it was true, but she let it sit because Tom saying we've always known had the effect of making her feel that she should have known and had simply forgotten, which was a feeling she recognized as not quite accurate and chose not to pursue at the time. The third morning she came downstairs and the chair was pulled out and there was something on the table. A coffee cup. Her coffee cup, the one she used every morning, white with a blue rim, a gift from Nora 2 Christmases ago, sitting on the table on the north side, the wrong side on the side with the pulled-out chair. Empty, clean. Set there deliberately, the way you set a cup when you have placed it in advance of filling it, the way you put your cup down in your spot before you start the coffee. She stared at the cup for a long time. Then she took it back to the counter. Then she made the coffee. She did not tell Tom about the cup. She was not sure why. The chair she had mentioned lightly, and Tom had given her the unlevel floor and she had let that go. But the cup was different and she knew it, and she did not want Tom to give her an explanation for the cup, because she did not think any explanation he offered would reach the thing that was wrong about the cup. And if she said this, if she said your explanation doesn't reach it, she would have to say what she thought did reach it, and she was not ready to say that. She was not sure she would ever be ready to say that. She told herself it was nothing. She was still telling herself that. But she had stopped pushing the chair back in. She had made a decision without making a decision to leave the chair as she found it in the mornings, to drink her coffee sitting in her own chair on her own side, with the pulled-out chair across from her and the empty cup. Some mornings there was a cup, not every morning, but some, on the north side of the table. She sat across from it. She drank her coffee. She did not look at the window. April, 6 weeks after the first morning. She came downstairs on a Saturday, Tom home, the kids home. A slow weekend morning, and the chair was pulled out and the cup was there and on the table beside the cup, placed with the same deliberateness as the cup, was a photograph. A printed photograph, 4 by 6, the kind you print at a pharmacy kiosk. She stood in the doorway and she looked at the photograph on the table, and then she walked to the table and she picked it up. It was a photograph of the kitchen. Her kitchen, taken from approximately where she stood each morning in the doorway. The table, the chairs, the window behind. The morning light coming through the window the way it came through in the early hours. The chair on the north side was pulled out. And in the chair, in the pulled-out chair, in the chair that was always pulled out, in the chair that faced the window, someone was sitting. She could not see who. The photograph was taken from too far back and the person in the chair was facing away, facing the window, exactly as the angle of the chair suggested, looking at the backyard. And she could see only the back of a head, shoulders, the shape of someone sitting in the morning light. She could not see who. But the shape was familiar in the way that the shapes of the people you have lived with for years are familiar. Not by face, not by feature, but by posture, by the specific way a body occupies space, by something below the level of feature recognition that is more animal and more certain. She knew the shape. She stood in her kitchen on a Saturday morning in April, and she looked at the photograph, and she knew the shape of the person sitting in the chair, and she did not say it out loud, and she did not say it to Tom, and she did not say it to Carrie, and she has not said it to anyone. She put the photograph in the kitchen drawer, the junk drawer, the one with the takeout menus and the dead batteries and the miscellaneous hardware. She put it at the back. She made the coffee. She sat in her chair. She did not look at the north chair. She looked at the window. The house on Orchard Street was built in 1962. Before the Marsh family, it had one owner, a woman named Dorothea Vance, who bought it new in 1962 and lived in it until her death in 2016 at the age of 89. 54 years in one house. The real estate agent who handled the estate sale described Dorothea Vance as a private woman who had raised one child, a son, in the house, and then lived alone in it for many years. She was described as a reliable neighbor, self-sufficient, occasionally seen tending a garden that had gone fallow by the time she died. The son, his name is in the estate records, did not attend the estate sale. He was contacted by the agent and did not return calls. The estate was settled by a lawyer. Ellen found this information 2 years before the chair started moving. She had looked up the house's history, the way people look up the histories of old houses, out of mild curiosity, in the way you become briefly interested in what something was before you arrived. She had read it and thought, 54 years in one house. She had thought, that is a long time to be somewhere. She had not thought about it again. She thought about it in April, after the photograph. She thought about Dorothea Vance, sitting at the kitchen table for 54 years. She thought about the north chair, facing the window, facing the backyard. She thought about the shape in the photograph and what she had recognized in it, and she said it, finally, quietly, alone in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning. She said it out loud to the empty chair and the cup that was there, and the morning light coming through the window. She said, I know. The house was quiet. The chair was pulled out. Neighbor name withheld, Orchard Street, 2024. Dot was particular about her kitchen. She had her routines. Every morning early, she'd be at that table by the window. You could see the light on. I'd be walking the dog before 6 and the kitchen light would be on in Dot's house and I'd think she's at her table. She did it for years, decades, just her spot, her morning. A pause. I wondered when the Marsh family moved in if the house would feel different. Houses get used to people, I think. I think they remember. The neighbor has lived on Orchard Street for 31 years. She still walks past the house each morning. She says the kitchen light is sometimes on very early. May 12th. Ellen came downstairs at 5:47 a.m., earlier than she had ever come down, woken by the particular silence that is not restful, the silence that has a shape, that fills a space the way something present fills a space. The kitchen was dim, the sun not yet up but the sky beginning, that deep blue that precedes dawn by 30 minutes and is its own kind of dark. The chair was pulled out. The cup was there. And the smell. She had not smelled it before and she recognized it immediately, which is the thing about smell, which is the thing that stays with her most, that she had not smelled it in 7 years of living in this house, and she recognized it from the first breath, because it was not a smell from this house. It was a smell from her grandmother's house, her own grandmother, dead 15 years. The specific combination hand cream, something floral, coffee, something older and drier underneath, the smell of an old woman's kitchen in the early morning. It lasted perhaps 30 seconds. She stood in the doorway and she breathed it and she did not move. When it was gone, she walked to the table. She sat in her chair. She wrapped her hands around her cup already at her place. She had not noticed this until she was already holding it. It had been on her side, on the south side, waiting for her. She sat across from the empty chair. She said quietly, the house still asleep around her, Tom and Nora and Ben still upstairs. The morning still dark at the window, she said. Good morning. The house was quiet. The chair was there. The window was dark, and then slowly, in the way of all mornings, it was not. Ellen sat at the table and watched the light come up over the backyard, and she drank her coffee and she did not feel, she said later. She said this to one person once, her sister who lives in another city and who listened without interrupting. She did not feel frightened. She felt sitting at the kitchen table on May 12th with the smell of her grandmother's kitchen fatting from the air, and the light coming through the window, and the empty chair pulled out on the other side of the table, she felt a company. She told her sister, "I think the house needed someone to know she was still there. I think she had been sitting at that table for 54 years and she didn't know how to stop. And I think she needed someone to just acknowledge it. To sit across from her and drink coffee and not be afraid." Her sister was quiet for a moment. Then her sister said, "Are you afraid?" Ellen thought about it. She said, "Not anymore. The chair is still pulled out each morning." Ellen no longer pushes it back in. Tom has stopped commenting on it. The kids have incorporated it into the kitchen's geography the way children incorporate the fixed facts of a household. It is simply how the table is. Ben once asked, around the time it started, whose chair it was. Ellen said it was the house's chair. Ben accepted this in the way that 11-year-olds sometimes accept things that are true without being explained. The cup stopped appearing in May after the morning of the smell. Ellen is not sure what this means. She has several interpretations and she holds them lightly without committing. The photograph is still in the junk drawer. She has looked at it many times. She knows the shape she recognized in it. She has not told Tom what she recognized, or why she recognized it, or what it means to her that a woman who died in this house at 89 is still sitting at the kitchen table in the morning. She has decided it is not her information to share. It is between her and the house. What she has noticed, what she thinks about, on the mornings when she sits across from the empty chair and drinks her coffee in the early quiet before her family wakes, is how long 54 years is. How much mourning a person accumulates in 54 years. How completely a body can learn a chair, a window, a cup, the specific quality of light at a specific hour. How hard it must be to stop. How understandable. She does not say good morning every day, only sometimes. When the kitchen has that particular quality, the smell, or something like it, or the feeling of the room being more occupied than it should be, she says it quietly to the chair, to the window, to whoever is in the north seat facing the backyard. Some mornings she thinks she hears, very faintly, in the specific register that is below hearing and above silence, something back. She does not say what she thinks she hears. Some things are between you and the house. The photograph is in the junk drawer. Ellen has never shown it to anyone, but she has turned it over. On the back, in handwriting that is not hers and was not there when she first found the photograph, in the careful cursive of someone who learned to write in a different era, 2 words. Thank you. Story 12, Black-Eyed Children full account. Before there were cities, there were children at the edge of the firelight. Not human children, not entirely. The accounts span millennia, carved into clay tablets in Mesopotamia, spoken into the oral traditions of cultures that never contacted one another, appearing in the margin notes of medieval ecclesiastical records in language that the scribes struggled to make adequate, because the language of their time had not been built to describe what they were describing. The accounts are not identical. They differ in detail, in context, in the specific texture of the culture that produced them, but they share a structure so consistent that the consistency itself requires accounting for. Something comes to the threshold. It is child-shaped. It asks to be let in. Its eyes are wrong. And every tradition, every culture, every account across 5,000 years of recorded human terror, every single one agrees on the most important thing. You do not let it in. The modern accounts begin, in the documented sense, in 1996. A journalist named Brian Bethel in Abilene, Texas, reported an encounter that he published online, and that spread through the early internet in the way that true things and invented things spread equally through the early internet, which is why the serious researchers, the ones who came later with methodology, had to start from the beginning. They started from the beginning. What they found was older than Bethel by a very long way. To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back to the beginning. Though the beginning, in this case, is not a place that human beings were present for. We arrived late to this. Whatever these things are, they were here before us. Dr. Yusra Ahmed is 47 years old and holds a joint appointment in comparative mythology and cognitive anthropology at the University of Edinburgh. She has spent 19 years studying what she carefully, methodically, and without sensationalism calls threshold entities, the cross-cultural category of entity that appears at the boundary between inside and outside, between safety and exposure, and requests entry. She is not, she will tell you immediately, a believer in the supernatural. She is a pattern analyst. She studies what human beings across time and culture have reported, and she asks what those patterns reveal about cognition, about shared deep structure in human fear, about the things that all of us, regardless of language or geography or era, have understood to be dangerous. The black-eyed children, her term for what she has spent the last 7 years specifically cataloging, are not, in her framework, necessarily real entities. They may be a persistent cultural transmission of an original experience, copied and modified across centuries. They may be an expression of a deep cognitive category, the uncanny child, the child that is not right, that the human brain generates independently across cultures, because the detection of wrong children is evolutionarily significant. She offers these frameworks without committing to them. Because the data, she says, is more specific than the frameworks can comfortably contain. The database she has built contains 2,847 accounts, collected from 61 countries, spanning, in the cases where historical sourcing is possible, from approximately 1200 BCE to the present. She has found, across those 2,847 accounts, 11 consistent elements. Not 9, not 12, 11. Every one of the 11 elements appears in more than 94% of all accounts. Across 61 countries, across 3,000 years. The consistency is, she says, and this is a woman who has been trained to resist the word extraordinary. The 11 elements are these. 1. The encounter occurs at a threshold, a door, a car window, a tent opening, a gate. The entity is always on the outside of something the witness is inside. 2. The entity appears child-shaped. Not always the same age. Accounts range from apparent ages of 5 to approximately 14, but always within the range that the human brain categorizes as child. 3. The entity is not alone in the majority of accounts. In 71% of cases, there are 2, occasionally 3, never more than 4. 4. The entity speaks. It does not act. It does not force. It requests. It uses language, the language of the witness, always to ask for entry. The specific phrasing varies, but the structure is consistent. We need help. Let us in. Please let us in. 5. The request is repetitive. The entity does not accept refusal and move on. It continues to request. Across the accounts, the longest documented instance of sustained requesting lasted, according to the witness, with no way to verify, approximately 4 hours. 6. The witness feels wrong before they see the eyes. This element took Dr. Ahmed the longest to identify because witnesses describe it differently: dread, wrongness, the feeling of something off, but the sequencing is consistent. The wrongness precedes the visual confirmation. The body knows before the eyes report. 7. The eyes, black from edge to edge. No iris, no white. The element that gives the entity its common name. Described identically across all cultures, all eras, including historical accounts that predate the modern internet community by centuries and could not have been influenced by it. 8. The witness wants to comply. This is the element Dr. Ahmed describes as the most significant and the most disturbing. In the overwhelming majority of accounts, the witness reports a strong, specific, active desire to open the door, not passive acceptance, active desire, against their own judgment, against the information their body is giving them, a pull toward compliance that witnesses describe as unlike anything else they have felt. 9. They do not comply. The accounts in the database are definitionally from survivors, from people who did not open the door. The database cannot capture what happens when someone does. 10. The entity leaves without being seen to leave. It does not walk away. The witness looks away or closes their eyes, or their attention breaks for any reason, and when they look back, the entity is gone. It does not depart. It ceases to be visible. 11. The witness is not the same afterward. Not frightened, not traumatized necessarily, though many are. Changed, in some way that they struggle to articulate and that Dr. Ahmed has documented across enough accounts to know is real, is consistent, is not the normal processing of a frightening experience. Changed as though something was begun that was not finished. What has been described is only the outermost edge of the truth. What lies beneath it is something for which no preparation is adequate. You were warned. The oldest account in Dr. Ahmed's database is fragmentary. It exists in a cuneiform tablet housed at the British Museum, originally excavated from the site of ancient Nippur in modern Iraq, dated by the museum to approximately 1200 BCE. The tablet is a list of protective incantations, practical spiritual technology, the kind of thing a household would consult for specific threats. One of the incantations is for the children who come at night and ask for shelter and must not be given it. The incantation specifies that the children will be small and dark-eyed and will speak your language and will ask you to feel sorry for them. It specifies, do not feel sorry for them. This is not a metaphor. This is not a moral parable about the dangers of trusting strangers. This is a protective incantation, a practical document, the ancient equivalent of a safety manual, and it treats the thing it describes as a specific, real, recurring threat that required a specific, real, practical response. Someone in Nippur in 1200 BCE knew what these things were. Someone in Nippur in 1200 BCE had encountered them enough times, or heard enough reliable accounts of encounters, to feel that a protective incantation was warranted. The medieval accounts are more specific. A document from a Cistercian monastery in Burgundy, France, dated to approximately 1347, the year before the first wave of plague arrived in France, though this is probably not relevant, describes what a monk named Brother Anselm encountered at the monastery's gate on a November evening. The document is in Latin. It has been translated and is part of Dr. Ahmed's database. Brother Anselm was on gate duty. 2 children came to the gate after dark. They said they were lost. They said they were cold. They asked to be let in. Brother Anselm writes, in the specific, careful Latin of a man trained to observe and record, that the children were wrong. He uses the Latin word pravis, which carries meanings of crooked, wrong, malformed, and wicked simultaneously, as though the language was straining towards something it had not been built to describe. He writes that their eyes were dark as the inside of a well, dark as a place where no light has ever been. He writes that he wanted, with a force he describes as like a hand on the back of my neck pushing me forward, to open the gate. He writes that he prayed instead. He writes that when he finished the prayer and looked again, the gate was empty. He writes at the end of the account, I do not know what they wanted. I know that I was not sufficient to give it. I know that what they wanted was something I have that I do not have words for, something I would not have had words for until that evening, something I am aware of now in a way I was not aware of before. He never specifies what this thing is. The account ends there. Dr. Ahmed published a preliminary paper on the cross-cultural consistency of threshold entity accounts in 2021 in the Journal of Comparative Mythology. The paper was careful, methodological, hedged in the language of academic caution that her field requires. It received more responses than anything she had previously published. Some were academic, some were not. Among the non-academic responses were 847 personal accounts from people who had read the paper. Somehow, it had circulated outside academic channels and recognized in its description of the 11 elements something that had happened to them. 847 accounts in 4 months from people who had not had language for what they experienced until they read her paper. She has since interviewed 112 of them. The 11 elements are present in all 112. Name withheld, age 34, rural Tennessee, 2019. It was 2 of them, a boy and a girl. They were at my car window at a rest stop at about 2 in the morning. I had pulled over to sleep for an hour. They knocked on the window. The boy said they needed a ride. Their parents had left them. Could I please unlock the door? And I want you to understand, I wanted to open that door more than I have ever wanted to do anything. It was not like wanting, it was like needing. Like the car was on fire and the door was the way out. And the whole time I was feeling that I was also knowing in some completely separate part of my brain that was screaming that if I opened that door I would not be okay. That whatever happened next would not be something I came back from the same. A long pause. I drove away. I drove with them still standing there. I watched them in the mirror until I couldn't see them anymore. They didn't move. They just watched me go. Another pause. I still feel the wanting. 3 years later, I still feel it. This witness has not stopped at a rest stop since 2019. Dr. Yusra Ahmed, 47, comparative methodologist, University of Edinburgh, 2023. The question I'm most often asked is what they are. And the honest answer is that I don't know, and I'm not sure the question is the right one. What I know is that they are old. Whatever this phenomenon is, it is old enough to have appeared in the written record of every major civilization that kept written records. It predates writing, almost certainly. It predates cities. And it is not getting less common. If my database is representative, and I believe it is, though it cannot be exhaustive, encounters are increasing, not decreasing. I don't have an explanation for that. I have a feeling about it. I keep the feeling to myself. There is a category in Dr. Ahmed's database that she calls completion accounts. There are 9 of them. 9 accounts out of 2,847 in which the witness either opened the door or the entity entered by means the witness cannot explain, or the encounter progressed beyond the standard structure into something she does not have a category for. She does not discuss the completion accounts publicly. She discussed one once with a colleague she trusted. The colleague did not sleep well for a week afterward. She has not discussed them again. What she will say, what she has said once at the end of a lecture, almost as an aside that the people in the room understood was not an aside, is this. The 9 completion accounts share an element that is not in the standard 11. All 9 witnesses describe, at the point when the entity enters or the door opens, a sound. Not from outside, not from the entity, from everywhere simultaneously. A sound they describe in each of the 9 accounts, independently, without coordination. A sound they describe as being below the range of sound, below what the ear processes, felt rather than heard, like the lowest note of an instrument so large it has no name. One of the 9 described it as the sound the universe makes when something that has been waiting a very long time is given what it came for. Dr. Ahmed does not know what they are. She has studied them for 7 years across 3,000 years of accounts, and she does not know what they are. She knows what they do. She knows how they operate. She knows the structure of the encounter, the threshold, the request, the eyes, the wanting, with the precision of someone who has mapped it obsessively from every available angle. She knows that the wanting, element 8, the active desire to comply that witnesses describe as unlike anything else they have felt, is not suggestion. not the ordinary persuasion of a child asking an adult for help. Something more direct than that. Something that bypasses the layers of judgment and caution and self-preservation that human beings normally operate through and reaches something underneath. Something that knows what you have underneath. Something that has always known. The last thing she will say about them, when pressed, and she is rarely pressed, because people who spend time with the accounts tend to become less curious about the answers, not more. The last thing she will say is about the eyes. The accounts describe the eyes as black, entirely black, no white, no iris, no reflected light. Eyes that absorb, that take in without returning. She has thought a great deal about this, about what it means phenomenologically, visually, to look into eyes that do not reflect, eyes that show you nothing back, in which you cannot see yourself. She says, we understand each other through eyes. We read intention, emotion, presence, recognition. We read all of it through eyes. Eyes that reflect nothing back are eyes that tell you nothing, that give you no information, that are, in the deepest visual sense, opaque. She says, when something looks at you with those eyes, you cannot know if it sees you. You cannot know if there is anything there that is capable of seeing. She says, and yet you want to let it in. She says, that is the part I think about most, not what they are, not what they want, but that whatever they are, whatever they want, we want to give it to them. We have always wanted to give it to them. For 3,000 years, standing at our thresholds in the dark, we have wanted to open the door. She says, that tells us something about them. She says, it tells us something about us. The database continues to grow. Dr. Ahmed adds to it each week new accounts, verified against the 11 elements, filed and cross-referenced and added to the total. She is aware that for every account she receives, there are hundreds she does not. People who had no language for what they experienced. People who do not speak any language in which she has solicited accounts. People who will not speak about it under any conditions, for reasons she understands and respects. She is aware that 2,847 is a floor, not a ceiling. She publishes her work carefully. She is careful because she knows that the work sits at the edge of what her field will take seriously, and she wants it taken seriously, because she believes that the pattern she has found is real and significant, and that serious, methodological attention to it is more useful than the alternative. The alternative being the accounts treated as folklore, as urban legend, as the cultural transmission of an original metaphor, as nothing that requires engagement with the possibility that something is genuinely, physically, repeatedly occurring at thresholds around the world in the dark hours of the night. She is a scientist. She follows the data. The data follows her home. She lives alone in a flat in Edinburgh, 4th floor, no garden, a buzzer system at the front door. She has lived in the flat for 6 years, and nothing has occurred at the buzzer that she has not been able to account for. She checks when it buzzes at unusual hours. She checks carefully. She looks at the camera feed before she buzzes anyone in. She has done this since the 2nd year of the research. She has done it so consistently that it has become habit, unconscious, the reflex check of someone who has spent years learning what to look for. She is asked occasionally if the research frightens her. She says it makes me careful. She is asked what the difference is. She says frightened people don't look, careful people do. She looks. Every time. She looks. The planet is 4.5 billion years old. Modern humans have existed for approximately 300,000 years. The accounts span 3,200 of those years. Whatever these things are, they were here for 4.499 billion years before the first account was written. They will be here long after the last one. They are patient. And so the night continues. The rain is still falling. You are still safe where you are. But somewhere in a house not unlike yours, a light just went out. that no one turned off. Sleep well. If you can.